is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 777. Jackpot. My name is Marshall. I'm running Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, welcome, bud. Luis is literally at the hospital right now with Gabby. She's in labor. They're doing the whole thing. And so this is your time to step in and fill in for Luis. Welcome.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. Glad to be stepping in for Luis here. Been really enjoying this format for the first few drafts that I've done so far, but happy to go over all the rares with you today.
That's right. We're going to be going over every single rare and mythic rare on the set review version of the show this week. And we've even got some special guests to go over as well. So we're going to do that for Foundations. And it's all happening today. Before we get into it, I want to say thank you to each and every person who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limitedresources. You get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail for signing up, and you get access to, well, a bunch of cool stuff, including a live version of this. We've got some of our patrons watching us record right now. Also, a behind the scenes recording, and access to things like the Patreon question of the week and stuff like that. Thanks, everybody who supports us on Patreon. It really does mean a lot. Thanks also to Ultimate Guard. They're the best in the business when it comes to protecting your cards, your decks, your collection. You know, you've got all these cards. They're obviously worth a bunch of money, and you want to make sure that you protect them. So if you need deck boxes, card sleeves, binders, albums, playmats, all that kind of stuff, you can find it at Ultimate Guard. You can check out their products at ultimateguard.com, and you can purchase them at your favorite local game store or your favorite online retailer. Okay, we're going to be giving each and every one of these cards a grade at the end of this. And so I'm going to go over the grading scale overview real quick, just for people that are new to it. If a card gets an A, by the way, we're going to do an A through F grade, similar to school here in the United States. If a card gets an A, it's a bomb. It's a game winner. It's good in many situations, particularly if you're behind in a game and you play this card and it catches you up. That's the type of card that can get into that A range. They're the best cards in the set. Super efficient stuff like that. Cards like Overlord of the Mistmoors or Valgavoth's Onslaught. Bs are cards that actively pull you towards their colors. They're often headliners for a set. They're go-to cards. You know, they may be one of the better uncommons in the set, for example. These are a lot of the cards that end up being Bs. And also really good removal often falls into the B category. Cards like Optimistic Scavenger and Unnerving Grasp. Cs are playables. They're the pawns of Limited. They're fairly interchangeable. You need some number of Cs in your deck. Many commons fall into the C range. Mediocre removal usually falls in here. Sometimes it's a D, as well as many combat tricks, cards like Manifest Dread and Seized from Slumber. Ds are the interesting ones. It is uncommon for us to find a D in the rares and mythic rare set, but sometimes they're here. They're sometimes playable, but you'd rather not run them. Cards that are kind of mediocre, junky, maybe they're situational, maybe they just have a high setup cost. They make the cut every once in a while, but they're usually like the card you're not thrilled with. Also, bad removal can go here. Cards like Anthropede and Baelmerk Leech. Fs are unplayable in virtually all scenarios. They're incredibly narrow cards or cards with insane mana costs that just aren't realistic, or that just don't do anything. They don't have any synergies. Cards like Leyline of Hope. We will find that on the rares and mythic rares review, the grades tend to be more polarized towards the A and F range rather than the middle, which is what we see in the common and uncommon review. There's two other grades that we give. There's sideboard. So these are cards that basically never make the main deck, but they can be very powerful out of the sideboard. And that's why we give them a separate grade here, you know, cards like Pyroclasm. And then there's also build arounds. These are cards that are typically not good enough on their own. The type of card that if you didn't support it and you put in your deck, it would probably be considered an F. But if you properly build around it, it can be maybe even the best card in your deck. Sometimes cards require a heavy build around, and sometimes they're easier to build around. And that's why we have this subcategory. Cards like Threats Around Every Corner and Gremlin Tamer. And by the way, those are two good examples of relatively easy to build around cards. And that's why one of the reasons they were so good in their set. So we're going to give every single one of these cards a grade, but it's really the discussion that matters. That's where you get the information about what Paul and I think about these cards. And that's where we can give you more nuanced information about where they may fit or where they may not into a format. So don't rely solely on the grade, rely more on the conversation. The grade's more like a punctuation mark for the conversation. We like to rotate which color we start with. And this set we're on red. So that means our first card is Kellen, Planar Trailblazer. Kellen is red for a 2/1 legendary human fairy scout at rare. And Kellen has 2 activated abilities. The first one is 1 in a red. If Kellen is a scout, it becomes a human fairy detective and gains whenever Kellen deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And then you can pay 2 in a red, and it says if Kellen is a detective, it becomes a 3/2 human fairy rogue and gains double strike. Dang, that's a lot of good stuff on a 1-drop, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really nice, aggressively slanted creature. One note about this card, there's a lot of cards that we've seen kind of similar to Kellen in the past where you invest some mana in it and it gets bigger and then it gets bigger again. The thing with Kellen is the first activation feels kind of underwhelming, relatively speaking, to cards like this that we've seen in the past because it doesn't gain combat stats, right? You play this on turn 1. If you upgrade this on turn 2, you're not adding to the board and you're not even drawing the card immediately because that first time you can't play the card, right? Because this red now has kind of 2 different ways to draw cards, either impulsively casting cards the turn that you activate the ability or until the end of your next turn. And this one is templated where you can only cast it on your turn. So not quite as nice as maybe some of the other variants that you've seen. But of course, this card's really hard to block, right? Once you get it to that first mode where you turn it into a detective, then at any point you keep up 3 mana, you just have the threat of this being a double strike creature. And if this ever connects, you're going to get a ton of value. So I think it's a really solid creature, but noting that it does take a pretty good mana investment to actually get a good amount of value. So I would put Kellen at maybe a B+.
B+ is what I was thinking too. Yeah, because the 2 notes for this are 1, it's not sorcery speed to be able to activate it. So as Paul said, you can do this as a threat during combat. And 2, maybe it's obvious, but double strike works really well with that first ability because you do get to retain the ability going forward, right? So you get 2 cards if it connects and also 6 damage. So that's, game's going to end pretty quick. Hard to ask for much more out of a 1-mana creature, I would say. B+ for Kellen, Planar Trailblazer. Next is Sear Slicer Goblin. This is 1 in a red for a 2/1 Goblin Warrior at rare. It has Raid at the beginning of your end step. If you attack this turn, create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token. Very, very simple card. Not complicated.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a solid 2-drop. Obviously, much better, like all raid cards, if you're on the play. Doesn't really help you very much if you're behind. But the fact that this costs 2, if you ever just play this, even on turn 2, and your opponent plays their 2-drop, and then you just kill their 2-drop, right? You're just getting immediate value out of this. So it's just one of those cards where if you're an aggressive deck, this card can be fantastic. If you have combat tricks, anything along those lines. And remember, this creature doesn't have to attack itself. So even in the late game, let's say you play a 3-drop, you attack, you trade with whatever they play. Then on turn 4, you double spell this with another 2-drop, and then you get a 1/1 token. You're just getting a good amount of value out of this. Obviously, still a bad card on the draw and not really a great card if you're behind. But I think it's good enough in the aggressive decks where I'd probably give this a B+.
I would too. This is the type of card that I just feel like you're going to be able to make a token most of the time. Like you don't need much, right? Anything that can attack and either trade, bounce, connect, anything, and you can just leave behind the 1/1 that can even just chump block, right? Even if it just soaks up a damage on the ground, you're still, getting incremental advantage through that. So B+ for Sear Slicer Goblin. Wow, those are 2 bangers to start. That's a 1-mana and a 2-mana creature like that asks almost nothing of you. Next is, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's crazy. Next is Electro Duplicate, which is 2 in a red for a sorcery at rare. It says, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice this token, and then you can flash Electro Duplicate back for 2 red from the graveyard.
Okay, well, so the first 2 cards were awesome. This one, not so much. I'm just not a big fan of temporary clone effects. This requires you to have a good creature in play that you want to copy, but you don't get that card forever. And then you spent your entire turn to get in for some amount of damage instead of adding to the board in any way. Oof. So I just would not want to play this card ever in my decks. I would give this an F unless you have a bunch of crazy bombs that have entered the battlefield effects. But I just don't want to put this card in my deck, I think.
I'm with you. It would be weird. You would have to have a weird setup to make this worth it. And even then, you have to have both pieces. Like, let's say you had some creature that generated some huge advantage just by existing for a turn. That's not really a thing. F for Electro Duplicate. Next is Flamewake Phoenix. I should mention at the beginning with Foundations that there are a significant number of reprints here as well. This whole set is roughly broken down 50-50 on reprints and new cards. So if some of these sound familiar, like Flamewake, you are correct. Trust your instincts there. This is 1 red for a 2/2 Phoenix. At rare, it's got flying and haste, and it attacks each combat if able. And it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you may pay red. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Yeah, so this is obviously very, very nice if you are in aggressive deck, right? Because this thing just continues to attack. There's not a million secret reach type cards in the format, so this thing can get in for a good amount. And of course, it's really, really sticky, especially if you play this in the red-green deck, which is going to have a ton of power 4 matters cards. But at the end of the day, this card is also kind of horrible if you're behind, because you can never have this creature block, right? This card has to attack every single turn. So I do like it in the aggressive decks, but I can't get it to a super high grade just because of the fact that it's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that can't block.
It's also difficult to cast, right? Double red is a real cost. I mean, you do get to block once, right? Like you can play it second main and chump with it or trade. It is actually annoying in that way. Like anything with 2 toughness on their side is like, oh, fine. Like they don't want to attack into it because they're worried you'll just buy it back at some point. So you get this one window, but realistically, this is a card that is only good on offense. It is really good at offense, though. Like, if your turn 3 play is Flamewake Phoenix, it's really annoying for your opponent if they're just going to be taking 2 in the air sort of perpetually. The times when it really stinks is when you're behind, which happens often in Magic, as it turns out. And also, if they put out a 2/3 flyer, like this thing, it's okay, right? But it just runs itself into it and then maybe comes back later. And that's not, a super great position to be in.
Yeah,
I still like it, because you do have to build around it to an extent of, as you said, you really do want to make sure that your deck is aggressively slanted. But if it is, Flamewake's good. Like, Flamewake's really annoying for the opponent.
Yeah, I think I would probably give this somewhere in the B range, just because there are certain decks. If you play some kind of a mid-range, more controlling deck, this card is not going to be that great. It's fine. But like I said, just because of the fact that it can't block, that's a pretty big deal. And really great point that you brought up about the double mana pip. A lot of people just seem to kind of ignore that or not care about it at all. Yeah. And it's a massive, massive deal. I firmly believe that, for example, we talk about Murder in previous sets and how it's mostly a C-level card just because the power creep of all the creatures. I feel like Murder should probably be 2 and a black. In order to give black the definitive best removal spell in the format, while also making it reasonable to cast. But that's a different tangent. But just, I think the double mana pip just takes a lot away from the power of the card.
It really does. And if you watch Paul's videos on his YouTube channel, Daily Drafts over at his channel, you'll see that he very much is cognizant of cards like this that have especially lower cost ones, like three drops that have double pips. And Luis does the exact same thing. Like these are, top tier limited players, and they're, almost never going to have like a basic 9/8 mana base and have like 2 cards, like one that has 1 double red and one that has 1 double black or something. It's just like, no, you have to choose one or the other. Like, don't, So I agree with you, by the way, about your grade. I would give Flamewake Phoenix a B, but it has a mild build around component in that there are going to be decks that it's actually, I could even imagine some decks that it's just straight up bad in, but
yeah.
Next is Slagstorm. This is 1 red for a sorcery. At rare, choose one. Slagstorm deals 3 damage to each creature, or Slagstorm deals 3 damage to each player.
So this is a pretty solid sweeper because 3 is a very big difference from 2, which is Pyroclasm, where you talked about that being kind of a decent sideboard card. Whereas 3 damage kills most creatures, kills a lot of creatures, especially a good draft deck. We prioritize mana curve. Hey, you want 6 or 7 2-drops, you want a bunch of 3-drops, and most 2s and 3s are going to die to this card. It's a little bit awkward though, because red so far seems to be looking like it's leaning towards the aggressive end of the spectrum. So playing a card like this is just a little bit awkward if you're, let's say, playing a red-white deck. Do you actually want this card in your deck? Right. Whereas if you're playing maybe a blue-red spells deck, or maybe more controlling deck, then this card can be very good. So I think on power level, I think this card probably is around a B. If you know, because I have been blown out by this card already, where I was just like, what can they have? What kind of sweeper can they have? And they just killed 6 of my creatures with Slagstorm. Right. But at the same time, it's just, if this was black, for example, I think it would be better positioned. But because red seems to be a little more aggressive, you just have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, it's tough because you do get the does 3 damage to each player kind of backup plan if you're in the aggressive deck. But that being said, you would never pay 1 red just to do 3 to your opponent. There are game plans that can arise by having Slagstorm in your hand that have nothing to do with doing damage to creatures. So that is a realistic thing that can happen. But, you have to recognize that it's very much a backup plan and not a primary. Tough to fit. I agree with you. I think power level, it's B or B plus range. Also, the double red is still a consideration, but a little bit less so. Than with like Flamewake Phoenix. You want to play Flamewake Phoenix on turn 3. Like that is the turn for a Phoenix. Slagstorm, not necessarily on turn 3. In fact, there's many times where you could cast it and wouldn't because you'd like to have your opponent maybe play one more creature to try to nab or something like that. I think I would settle on probably a B for Slagstorm, like on average. I would not put it in the sideboard camp. I think that this crosses the threshold to be main deckable often enough that yes, there are going to be decks that would prefer it in the sideboard. As you mentioned, red-white probably just doesn't want the card at all. Could be the case. But so I'm going to say B for Slagstorm. Ooh. Yeah. Our boy's back. Krenko Mob Boss. This is 2 red for a 3/3 legendary Goblin Warrior at rare. And it has the activated ability, tap, create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens where X is the number of goblins you control. And just as a quick reminder, Krenko is a goblin, as I mentioned, and counts himself.
Yeah, and so Krenko is incredible. It's one of those removal check rares where if you don't draw a removal spell for this in 1 or 2 turns, you're just going to lose the game. Right? Yep. You play this on turn 4. On the following turn, even if you have no goblins, you make a token, right? Because it itself is a goblin. Then the next turn you make 2 goblins, and then one more turn your opponent's just dead. Right. At the same time, there are a good number of playable goblins that do exist in the set. There's a handful. Some of them are at common, and one of the reasonable ones that you want to play, and especially in a deck that has Krenko, is the 2 in a red instant speed make 2 1/1 goblin tokens or Trumpet Blast, right? It's kind of a modal card. Imagine playing that on turn 3, Krenko on turn 4. Let's say you have another one, you get to just go absolutely nuts with this card. That being said, obviously your opponent does get that 1 turn to kill the Krenko, but if they don't, this can take over the game. So I mean, this card is obviously really, really sweet. You're never really going to be passing this card when you open it in a pack.
Yeah, I think Krenko's an A. Like I just think Krenko's one of the premier threats. There's a certain category of card, Paul, that sort of almost makes like a mini game, right? Where like if Krenko hits the board, it's rare that anything else matters except for Krenko. Like if Krenko lives, you're going to win. If it doesn't, then we got a game again. And that's a lot of respect, for a 4-drop here. And so I'd give him an A. What do you want to give Krenko?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a planeswalker if you think about it in that way.
That's a good way to look at
it. When it's in play, you absolutely have to kill it. Like I said, the only downside is if somehow you're behind and you play this. But, it's like at the same time, if this doesn't die, this just straight up kind of wins you the game. So I think, maybe it's not at the absolute top of the A's, but somewhere between A and A- for me.
Yeah, that sounds right to me too. One quick question: would you bump? Let's say you pick one Krenko and you end up in like red white. Do you pick Either or cards that could protect Krenko for cheap, and or cards that could give him haste any higher. Like, are those considerations for you? Like, does he reach like a build around level, or is it just like, I'm going to play Krenko, and if you don't kill him, I'm going to win, and that's good enough for me?
So I did literally have that decision to make, where there is the 2-mana 2/2 red creature that taps to give something haste, which isn't insane by any means. But because I had the Krenko, it was kind of the tiebreaker, because I was just saying, hey, I want to live the dream. I want to be able to play this. It's a totally fine card in an aggressive deck anyways. But then if I ever go that into make 2/1/1 goblins into Krenko, I just straight up win the game. So I played it. So I do think whenever you have bomb level creatures that require protection, you want to prioritize a little bit heavier. For example, Shard Mage's Rescue in the previous set.
Right.
If your deck's got 2 Gremlin Tamers or whatever, you're going to take that much, much higher just to make sure that you can protect the creature. And Krenko's on that same level. There is the I don't have all the names down yet. It's only been a day since the set's come out.
Yeah.
But the 1 white prevent all damage to a creature and give it a +1/+1 counter. I'd probably prioritize that higher as well, just to make sure that maybe I can play the Krenko on turn 5 and keep up a little bit of protection for the creature.
Yeah. So just keep those little things in mind as potential. The third category for that are ways to buy it back if you're in black or something, and you can reanimate it or bring it back to your hand. Next is Twin Flame Tyrant. Well, this looks scary. It's 3 red for a 3/5 dragon at Mythic rare. So, once you see that, that the gloves are coming off.
Good.
Yeah. So it does have flying. And it says, if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. Wow. And you get 5 toughness on this thing too.
Yeah, this card's just an absolute beating. I mean, if you just look at this card at face value, it's a 5-mana 6/5 flyer with nothing else you need to do with this card. It's a 5-mana 6/5 flyer, which is just a really, really solid creature. But imagine you have creatures in play. You play this, you attack with your creatures. They will trade with everything your opponents have for the most part, right?
That's obscene.
And then imagine you play this and then you cast Burst Lightning, right? You can just kill your opponent. You can deal 8 damage to your opponent. This card's ridiculous. It only costs 5 mana. It's it's fairly cheap to cast, and then it just completely takes over the game. Has to be killed. I mean, I think this is an A.
Yeah, it's an A. This is yes. Twin Flame Tyrant is an easy A. It doesn't get to A+ range. Because it's not as great at you want to make a couple of tokens or something so that you don't die.
Glorybringer or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Get a 2-for-1 guaranteed, but this is an easy A for Twin Flame Tyrant. That's just nasty. Next is Ajani Primal Storm. This is 4 red for a 6/6 legendary elder dinosaur, better than dragons. It's rare. And it says, whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs.
So this is kind of the I think this is the original Ajani, right? Because we've seen the 7-mana version in the various vintage cubes, which is very, very powerful. This is certainly not on that level of power, but it does cost 1 less. So 6 mana for 6/6. When you attack, you get to now if you hit a land, it doesn't really do anything, right? It's just, but the thing is, if you can attack multiple turns with this, then it's obviously great. But at the same time, it is a 6-mana creature that when you play it, it doesn't give you any value immediately. So it does give your opponent some time to answer it. And the fact that, it costs 6 mana means, your opponent probably has some way to maybe possibly deal with this card. I think it's definitely a solid creature, gives you a bunch of value. But I don't know if that it's quite good enough to kind of get to that A level.
Yeah, I would give it an A. I mean, I would give it.
You think it's an A?
Maybe an A- or whatever. But I mean, it's huge, right? It's 6 mana, 6/6, and if you turn it sideways, like yes, lands don't hit, but you get a card off of both players' library. Like you just get to cast anything for free. Like you don't have to hit much. To me, this is on the similar must kill level as Krenko. It's just way slower, comes down later, but it's got 6 toughness and like maybe they've used up their removal on the stuff you played prior and this kind of cleans up the mess. But I just view it as like a premium threat, I would say, and it's still a 6/6 for 6. So I would say A- for Ajani for me. If you turn it sideways twice, the game's over. I mean, you've exiled 4 cards and you get to cast any spells from there for free.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually get to play with this card when it originally came out.
It's nasty.
It's so I can believe that. It also obviously depends kind of on the speed of the format, right? If the format tends to be on the faster side, then this maybe goes down a half a letter grade or something along those lines. But if it's on the slower side, then I can, this can definitely just be straight up an A. So A- seems like a reasonable place to land on it.
Yeah, good in ramp decks, all that kind of stuff. Next is Rite of the Dragon Caller. Same mana cost, 4 red for an enchantment. This one's mythic rare. And it says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying.
I mean, this is a sweet, sweet card, right? Like, you have so many hopes and dreams when you have this card. The issue, of course, is this is a 6 mana enchantment. When you play it, nothing happens.
Literally nothing happens.
Literally nothing. You get nothing out of this. So I just feel like in most decks, there's so many fail cases for this, right? Because first of all, 6 mana, you play this and then you can just die. Additionally, you could just be playing like a Gruul deck that only has maybe 5 spells. Then you just don't even want this card in your deck. So I think in a lot of decks, this card is just bad, where you're just not going to be able to trigger it often enough. So it's kind of like a D level card. But if you have maybe a cool blue-red control deck that has some decent amount of card flow going, you need to make 2 dragons out of this card to actually have this be worth it, right? Because if you pay 6 mana for this, you took the turn off, and then you played 1 spell and you get a 5/5, that's still not even that great.
No.
Right?
No.
It's like a suspend 5/5 flyer for 6 mana. That's not ideal. But if you have a blue-red deck where you have Think Twices and some other ways to just cantrip through and cycle through your deck, I could see this being maybe, a build around C+ level card.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I would view this as giving you inevitability, right? Like if you have the absolute awesomest blue-red spell stack with all the removal, token making, stuff to keep you alive, if you have a Rite of the Dragon Caller in your deck somewhere, like you are going to win the game at some point, right? If you have enough velocity of seeing enough cards, you're going to find it. It's too fragile. It's too slow to be, really good in just a regular deck.
Right.
The truth, though, is that those type of decks usually don't have that hard of a time finding a way to win the game. And from what we've seen, it looks like a pretty decently supported archetype in this set too. Balmor looked really strong. There was a whole lot of stuff going on. There was a lot of prowess or prowess adjacent stuff, to help you win the game incrementally, or, not have all your eggs in one really slow, really expensive, really mythic rare basket like this. To me, this is here for dreamers, right? Like I just, it's month 2 of the format, and it's like, I open up Rite of the Dragon Caller and, I'm doing it. It's for people like you, Paul, for content creators, where you're like, we're doing it. we're going,
Yeah.
and I love it, but that doesn't mean that it's good. Rite of the Dragon Caller it is obviously a pure build around, and I agree with you. It's a low, like it's not even that good. It seems like a build around C or something, which is kind of an insulting grade, for a card that we clearly both like. Like, this is cool.
It's got dragons on it.
It has literally dragons chasing each other around on the card. But it's probably just not worth it overall.
Cool card, though.
Speaking of, Brass's Bounty, 6 and a red for a sorcery at rare. It says, for each land you control, create a treasure token. Well, that's the easiest F ever.
Let's just give this one an F and move on.
Yeah. Next is Chandra Flame Shaper. This is also 7 mana, but it's 5 red. This is a 6 loyalty legendary planeswalker Chandra at mythic rare. 3 activated abilities. +2 loyalty, add 3 red mana. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. Choose 1. You may play that card this turn. Wow. You get the mana too? That's nice. +1, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token. Kind of interesting. And then it's got a -4, which you can do straight away and still have 2 loyalty to boot. Chandra deals 8 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. Dang, that's nice. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, this card seems just, if you build your deck to try to support Chandra, this card will just straight up win you the game by itself. The fact that it can just protect itself immediately the turn that you played is incredible, right? You play this on turn 7 and you just go, assume you just have kind of an even-ish board state and you just play this. You're like, all right, killed 3 of your creatures, right? They're not going to be able to kill it, right? You just killed like half their entire board most likely. And then on the following turn, you just get to basically nearly impulse every single turn, right? And you tick this up multiple times. I think that +1 is probably the weakest ability that Chandra has.
For sure.
But if that ability just didn't exist, just the +2 and the -4 are really, really strong. The fact that even on a board where if your opponents don't have any creatures, you just play this turn 7, very likely you're going to be able to find a card that you can cast off that 3 mana that you get from the +2 ability.
Wow. That's an impressive card. That's a bomb. Now, the question, of course, is the 7 mana. You mentioned you kind of need to build your a ramp deck, a green-red deck, something like that can get this down a turn sooner. Is going to have a much better time. 7 mana is the inflection point at which things get difficult, right? The difference in turns between 6 mana and 7 mana is like 2.5. It's a huge gap by the time you're at the point of having played out 6 lands and you're waiting for your 7th. It takes a lot of extra time to actually get to that point. So that's the thing. If you can reliably make 7 mana, Chandra Flameshaper is amazing. I would put this card into my red decks that didn't have ramp. I would still do that just because 7 mana does happen often enough. But, she could be an awkward fit in a hyper-aggressive deck or something. But honestly, for this level of power, if I'm playing 17 lands, I'm playing Chandra Flameshaper if I'm playing red.
Yeah, I just think the strength of Chandra will vary a little bit just based on the type of deck that you have. For example, let's say you're just playing like a red-white deck. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have as much card flow going. You're not going to have as much ramp. And in decks like that, she's good. She's always going to be good. But because she costs 7, maybe she's kind of in the A- B+ zone just because she costs 7.
The 7 mana.
Yeah, for 7 mana is kind of that big thing. But in any deck that somewhat supports the Chandra, let's say you've got some Llanowar Elves, let's say you have your blue-red with some card draw, then she's just an A.
Yeah, she is an A+ on power level. Like
A+, right?
Right,
yes,
because this is the card that you can play when you're significantly behind, and you are no longer significantly behind. In fact, you're ahead because you get to effectively wrath their board, and you have a card draw engine left over. So it does not get better than that. The only consideration with Chandra is the mana cost. Can you get this card onto the battlefield? Because if you can, you are going to win a lot. This is probably one of the highest win rate cards for when it gets cast.
When you cast it.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, those the Dune Blast variants, the Wraths, where you get to keep a creature in play and they lose everything else. Yep. She's kind of like that, where she kind of kills everything and she just stays in play and just continues taking over the game.
Totally. And of course, this card is absolutely amazing if you're at parity or ahead. It's an absolute hammer. Last red card is Drakiseth, Maw of Flames. Also 7 mana, but even harder to cast. 4 red for a 7/7 legendary creature dragon at rare. It's got flying, and whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. Yeah, I mean, look, this is a very prototypical, super expensive, super hard to cast bomb dragon that it's a really nice contrast against Chandra. Because Drakiseth is going to get a reasonable grade, but nowhere near what Chandra. Chandra is an A+ level card, and Drakiseth is definitely not. This card comes down, it's harder to cast, it's expensive, it doesn't do anything the turn it ETBs as far as affecting the board other than just being huge. If it dies, absolutely nothing happens. That's not true for Chandra. If you do get to turn it sideways, it is game over. This card is unbelievable. If you've ever had the misfortune of playing against it, which I have before, it was in a prior core set, and it's just stupid. It just crushes. What do you want to give it grade wise, though? I mean, it is hard to cast, and it is, not the equalizer that a card like Chandra is.
Yeah, I think given the fact that, like you said, hard to cast, very expensive, goes in very specific decks, I can't even get this, I think, to the A range, maybe a B+.
That's what I think too.
Because you play this And if it doesn't die, you do win. You just straight up win. That's not even necessarily the case with Atali, which I think is a better card. But you don't just you don't straight up win right away. With Dracus, you get that one trigger, it's game over. And you talked about earlier where it's like, do you consider playing a creature that gives something haste? You better believe I'm going to play that card if I have Dracus in my deck. Right?
Totally, because then you get to just win that turn.
Exactly.
And let's say have instant speed removal. Yeah, I'm with you. The mana cost and the relative slowness here are real concerns. So I think it puts Drakaseth at about a B, but it does play at an A range when on the battlefield. The considerations are just getting it to that point. And, this is triple red is a difference between double red. Even at the 7 mana spot, it's not, we're not talking about like a big deal breaker like we were talking about with the Phoenix and stuff, but it will occasionally bite you that you somehow just don't have the triple red for this. There's just these little things that kind of chip away at it and make it, that knock it down. In a ramp deck, I'm in. I mean, Drakaseth is a very, very good high-end finisher, ramp target type thing. But in an average deck, getting to 4 triple red is a major, it's an issue. So I would say B for Drakaseth Maw of Flames, based mainly just on the mana cost.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing is just the best way to ramp in the entire format is Llanowar Elves. And that doesn't, a lot of the times, all that green mana with the triple red, you're just not even going to be able to play the Drakaseth. Whereas with some of the other red rares that we've seen, double red, a lot more easy to pull off with the Llanowar Elves.
Right. And, a perfect example, between like a B and an A would be if Drakaseth had that ability that said, it says when it attacks. If it said when it enters or attacks, it does this.
Gosh.
Right. Well, that's kind of what Chandra does, right? Where it gets to just spew around a bunch of damage and kill stuff. That would change the grade so much because all the goal would be just to simply get to the 7 mana. And now you've stabilized the board, but this gives you that whole turn cycle for your opponent to have sorcery speed removal to kill it, get it out of the way, bounce it. Like try bouncing Chandra, it doesn't do anything. If you bounce Drakaseth, you probably just lost. So anyway, that's the difference, that why Drakaseth are these big dragons don't get those huge grades. All right, that's it for red. Red has some really powerful rares, I have to say. Let's see if green can keep up. First up, it's our boy Scavenging Ooze. 1 and a green for an ooze. It's a 2/2, and you can pay green to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, the ooze gets a +1/+1 counter, and you gain a life.
Yeah.
How good is Scavenging Ooze in limited? I the most I've played of it has been in Cube, where it's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely really solid. It's kind of a late game card, right? You can play it on turn 2, but it's not really going to be that effective until you kind of get into the late game after some combat has occurred. There are matchups where this card is really, really strong. Let's say you play against the blue-black deck that cares about getting to threshold, then this kind of shuts things off. But, this card just does a lot of work for just what looks like a 2-mana card. If you have removal spells, and then you can just have this grow over time. So I think this is a very solid creature, but doesn't quite kind of get to that super bomb level card just because, some trades happen every now and then. You're going to have this get to a 3/3, a 4/4. Yes, you will occasionally have the game where this becomes a 6/6 or a 7/7, but that happens not all that often.
Yeah, and it all adds up, right? The life gain adds up. Getting a little extra creature. I would say B+ for Scavenging Ooze. What do you think?
That's what I got too.
Okay, yeah, B+ for Scavenging Ooze. Next is Elvish Archdruid. This is 1 green for a 2/2 elf druid at rare. It says other elf creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can tap the Archdruid to add green for each elf you control.
So there are a couple of good common elves that you can play in this. You have Llanowar Elves and Dwinnen's Elite, which I guess would allow you to then generate a bunch of green mana. So I guess if you have something to do with all that green mana, then that would be helpful. But I think how many Llanowar Elves are you actually going to end up with in this deck? And the biggest drawback for this card is just the fact that it costs double green. Again, we've already talked about this in the past. If this was 2 colorless and a green, that'd be a huge difference. I mean, we're talking about at least half a letter grade difference if this costs 2 and a green. I actually don't think the Archdruid is particularly strong. There's just not enough. I don't think elves as an archetype is supported well enough in Foundations draft. So I think, for that reason, this card is just okay. There's a world where this card would be great, Lorwyn or something like that, where it was an all tribal based set. But here, I think it's like a D plus. I don't think it's maybe a C minus if you have a lot of elves.
Yeah, I was going to give it a build around grade. Yeah. Because look, I mean, if you go Llanowar Elf into Elvish Archdruid, it is stupid. Like the thing taps for a bunch of mana, it pumps up your elf. Like it is a really great start. It's just that's such a narrow case. And like you said, it's not super supported. I was going to say build around C plus for Elvish Archdruid. It's a solid card if you can build around it, but that's a big if. Your grade definitely reflects what I would say would be the average case for it, which is it's like a D. Yeah,
like say you have a draft deck with one Llanowar Elves and one of the 5-mana 5/3 that land falls into elf tokens. Like, how good is this card? Not very. It's
still just fine. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's pumping them up. It adds mana. I mean, remember the Archdruid taps for mana itself, like even with no help. But who wants a 3-mana 2/2 that taps for mana? Like that's hard to cast. Like that's not a thing. So yeah, you have to put in work to make the Elvish Archdruid good. And it feels like that's going to be a stretch in this set. Oh my God. Goat tier, one of my all-time favorites. Genesis Wave, green X for a sorcery at rare. Reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanent cards with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard.
So Marshall, what do you need to Genesis Wave for to actually be happy?
I think 5 is the sweet spot in limited. Like if you can hit, any lands, of course, but if you can hit anything of your creatures that cost up to 5, you probably will only have maybe 0 or 1 or 2 that cost more than that. So that would cover enough cards, 5 cards. And then if you hit any 5 drops or below, you're going to get them. That's probably where it's at.
Yeah,
but that's also 8 mana.
Right. It's green, 5. Maybe if you have a bunch of Llanowar Elves and Elvish Archdruids, you can maybe live the dream here. This was a card that was kind of the payoff card in the old standard mono green devotion decks with Nykthos and a bunch of mana acceleration. But I think just in a normal game of limited, this is just going to be really hard to pull off and get a lot of value out of. If you Genesis Wave for 3, it's extremely mediocre.
Super bad.
If you Genesis Wave for 4, that's maybe okay. Mm-hmm. And then 5+ is where you're getting to actually being able to get some value out of this. Now, granted, you also have to build your deck in a way where you don't have that many spells. You need to make sure you have a ton of creatures. There's just so many things that you need to do and things that need to go right for this card to actually even be remotely playable. I just personally don't think it's actually worth going through the hoops.
No.
But it's a really sweet card.
It is. This is very much the Rite of the Dragon Caller for green, right? It's a fun card to build around. It's a dream. You may be able to pull this off a few times in the format. It might be a little better in sealed, but overall, it's like a build around D or C or something. Like if you put in the work
/ build around D.
But in a regular deck, it's just an F. I mean, it's just way too slow, way too expensive to make it work. But it's really cool and it is fun to play for sure. Next is Loot, Exuberant Explorer. This is 2 and a green for a 1/4 legendary beast noble at rare. It says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. Okay, on a 3-drop, that's pretty good. You might actually still have a land in your hand the turn you play it, so you could get that 4th land down. And then it has an activated ability, 4 green, tap. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from among them and put it onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So you get a 3 mana 1/4 that somewhat turbos your lands. And then, I mean, by the time you start activating this, that's great, right? You're just getting hopefully an expensive creature every turn kind of for your 6 mana.
Yeah, I thought what's really funny is I thought this was a 3 mana 1/1 when I just did not see the toughness because I think the previous loot was maybe it was a 1/2. I'm not sure, but I remember asking. I went to the pre-release with Shuhei Nakamura, and I was like, "Would you play this card? It's a 1/1." He's like, "Paul, read the card." And I was like, "Oh, it's a 1/4. Oh, okay, I'll play this card." Yeah, I mean, look, 3 mana for a 1/4. Not crazy stats or anything, but the fact that this can ramp you and basically kind of naturally get to utilize this as early as turn 4 even, right? You play this on turn 3, play land number 4, turn 4, you double land. It's unlikely, but if you do that, all of a sudden you get to activate and basically look at the top 6 cards, and you're not going to have creatures that cost more than 6 in your deck for the most part. So it basically reads 6 tap, put a creature into play, right? And you can do this at instant speed, which makes this really difficult to play around. Traditionally, effects like this are kind of sorcery speed. So I think this kind of gets to that level of, man, if I don't kill this, my opponent's going to get a lot of value. Of course, still naturally getting to 6 lands isn't always the easiest thing. But I think this card's pretty solid. I don't think I'm ever going to obviously cut it from my deck. It's just a decent blocker that gets me some acceleration. I would give Loot a B.
Okay, yeah, that seems about right to me too. The 4 toughness is actually pretty decent. And then, yeah, if you do run out of gas completely or flood out, this is good insurance. The average activation of this is going to be, you're probably going to be down on mana for it, but you're getting the card for you get to effectively draw and cast the card for that ability. So, and you're filtering too, so that makes it pretty good. Next card is Mossborn Hydra. This is 2 and a green for a 0/0 elemental Hydra at rare, and it has trample. And yes, it does enter with, well, in this case, a +1/+1 counter on it, but it has landfall. Whenever a land enters, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on this creature. I mean, how great, that gets out of hand very, very quickly. If you wait till turn 4, play the Hydra, then play your land, you got a 2/2 trampler. That's the last point at which you're unhappy with this card. That's the only moment that you're like, yeah, no, I got a 2/2 trample for 3. But after that, it's 4/4, 8/8, and then the game's done.
Yeah. I mean, this is the type of card that's incredible if you kind of have it in your opener. Obviously, the card that's not ideal if you top deck it in the game, just because it is a 1/1 and you have to grow it. The dream here with this is to, of course, pair it with Evolving Wilds. Mm-hmm. So on turn 4, you play the Hydra, and then boom, you just have a 4/4 Trampler, and it's just over, right? The next turn you play another land, and you just have a 3-mana 8/8 Trampler. So the upside is super, super high for this card because, I mean, once you get it to, like you said, even if you just get this to a 4/4 Trampling creature, it's very, very good. Now, of course, we've had a lot of green rares in the past with that are straight up 3-mana force, right? With no setup costs. It's just you play this on turn 3 and it dominates combat because it's the biggest creature in play. That's not the case with this one. It does take a little bit of time to kind of set up here. So,
yeah, no, totally. The fact that they gave it trample to me is the game breaker for a card like this, because, usually when they get generous with, oh, we're going to make this thing massive, right? Because this card, if left unchecked, gets, anytime you have doubling, it just gets completely stupid really, really quickly, especially for a game action, rewarding a game action like playing a land in the early part of the game or mid part of the game, which is something that you're just going to do anyway. But, they'll be like, okay, you've got yourself an 8/8, but it just gets chump blocked a lot, right? Or whatever. But this is like a legit threat really quick. Like this thing will kill you before you can kind of get your feet under you if you don't have removal. The question I have about it is kind of when to play it, because you really do want to play it on turn 3/4 to get the counters rolling as soon as possible to make it the biggest threat it can. But at that stage of the game, that is when your opponent is most likely to have removal to kill it, especially if they can catch it in the window where it's a 1/1 or a 2/2, which, this is a triggered ability off of landfall. So you will have these gaps for instance to kill it. And so I think that there's going to be some strategy to that about what color you're playing against, that type of thing. If you're playing against blue-white, they could just run the dang thing out there because their removal is going to take care of it anyway. But if you're playing against black-red, there could be a world where you actually want to sandbag it, even if it goes against convention, because you figure, well, I just don't want to get this thing shocked or whatever,
Yeah, we'll note, though, that because with the removal, there's just not a big difference between a 1/1 and a 2/2, I would say. Sure. Right? We have the disfigure effect and the burst lightning effect. So I would guess that the best time to likely play this in most instances is just turn 3. You just play it. If they have the shock, they have the shock. And then you just play your land and kind of go about your day. Also, you can kind of set that up with, if you can play the Hydra, then the next turn you play a land, and then you play maybe another card that gets you a land. Then boom, that all of a sudden you can just attack for 4. So I would just play this as a turn 3. You play this. If you don't kill it, it can potentially take over the game. Sure, they can craft a plan around it, but if this doesn't get answered, it will win you the game. Definitely. So I think that makes sense. Now, if this was landfall, turned it into a 3/3, that kind of changes the equation, right? Because if it turns into a 3/3, then you wait till turn 4. You go play this turn 4, play a land, and then you can maybe navigate a game where you can play around those various 2 damage effects. But I don't think there's a huge difference between 1 and 2. So I would most likely play this on turn 3. In most instances, unless I have Evolving Wilds in my hand.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, if you can't get it up to 4/4 right away, there is almost no difference there. So yeah, definitely just run it out there and see what happens. I want to give this a pretty decent grade. I think I would go B+ for Mossborn Hydra. I think this is a top tier level threat. I think it gets big enough, it must be dealt with, and you're only paying 2 and a green for it. So I would go B+ for Mossborn Hydra.
Yeah, B+ is good. I think there's enough of a fail case with drawing this late, or it's a pretty fragile body on turn 3 where we can't quite get it to the A tier. But if you don't kill it, it's going to kill you.
It will kill you. Next is Spinner of Souls. This is 2 and a green for a 4/3 Spider Spirit at rare. It's got reach. It says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Wow. So you get a 3 mana 4/3 reach. If your stuff dies, you just get to replace it with the next creature in your deck.
I just know that you just love this card.
This is amazing.
This is a Marshall card if I've ever seen it.
I feel so safe and warm when I read this card. Like nothing can go wrong.
What the heck? Wait a second.
Yeah. Of course, the downside here is that the use case from your opponent's perspective is very straightforward, which is just kill your Spinner of Souls. That's it. Solves all the problems. Yep. There's no leftover value. But man, you're getting a 4/3 reach. I'd like it even more if it was a 3/4 reach, to be honest. But a 4/3 reach is a beater for 3 mana. Like you can turn that thing sideways a few times and do 8 damage. I think the thing with the Spinner is I would tend to play a little bit recklessly with it. I think I would just be willing to block, be willing to trade it, be willing to attack with it, and just say, what if I got a 3 mana 4/3? That's good. Like that's going to hit hard. That's going to matter at that stage of the game. And then I'll just take the other stuff. If I need to block, the reach will come into play. And if somehow my other creatures start dying, fine. I doubt that that'll end up being a game plan very often.
Yeah, this card is just excellent, just on rate, right? 3 mana for 4/3 reach. It's really early, but it's looking like blue-white is one of the stronger archetypes in the format, which does have a good good number of flyers. Being able to play a good reach creature, a good creature that incidentally has reach is really strong. Being able to block healers, hawks, etc. So the body itself is fantastic. Just 3 mana for 4/3 reach, full stop. You're never cutting that card from your deck. But then if there's just ever this board where there's just creatures on both sides, like what is your opponent going to do, right? Anytime a trade happens, you're always up a card on the exchange.
Totally.
It's just rough. And then let's say you pair this in a black-green deck, you sacrifice a creature to Eaten Alive, kill one of their things, and then you just draw more cards. This just kind of can take over the game with already just kind of having a nice sizing.
It's interesting because how much better would this card be if it was like a crappy, like a 1/1?
Oh, yeah. No,
right?
that's...
where the opponent's like, I don't want to use removal just to kill that annoying thing. But they made this card so good that like it's one of the most obvious, like you just can't point removal at anything other than Spinner of Souls, right? Like, so it's kind of funny where if it had, Laux used to call it keyword crappy, like, it's just like a junky creature that you don't want to use removal on. It would create a funny, different dynamic, but that's not the case here. That said, we're not going to dock it for being awesome. Stats
-1 grade. It has too much power.
Yeah. Does it get to the A range for you? I'm like stuck between B+ and A-.
Yeah, I think because of the stats, like you said, if this was just like a 3-mana 2/3 with reach with this ability, you would still play that card. It would be a
Definitely.
very, very solid card. But the fact that this just gets in there, it also triggers the 4 power stuff in the red green deck randomly.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I would give Spinner of Souls an A-. There's just
Okay.
no downsides
Yeah,
for this card.
a lot of upside. Next is Sylvan Scavenging. This is 1 green for an enchantment at rare. It says at the beginning of your end step, choose one. You can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, or you can create a 3/3 green raccoon creature token if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. That's just an obscene card.
Yeah, I mean, this card is so sweet. I think obviously you want to be, in general, creating raccoons more than the +1/+1 counter because you're just getting way more stats. But of course, this also helps you make your own raccoons, right? If you have smaller creatures in play, you just start piling on counters on that creature, eventually to the point where you start getting a bunch of raccoons. Doesn't really have any cost other than, hey, play creatures in your deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
it. Yeah. And you play this on turn 3, and if you just don't get run over, this is just going to completely take over the game. This card seems pretty awesome. Totally.
Yeah. Like you said, the only requirement is that you play some, a decent amount of creatures.
A-?
Yeah. A- for Sylvan Scavenging. It's just a card that also we have to remember that enchantments are generally speaking the hardest type of permanent to deal with. So this is like an extremely annoying card to have to mess with. Next, Doubling Season. This is 4 and a green for an enchantment at Mythic. It says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many instead. And if an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, you get twice that many counters on the permanent instead.
Yeah. This is a sweet commander card, and I think it's unplayable in traditional limited.
Yeah, is there any token build around something weird that could make this worth it? There's just not, right?
If you have a bunch of hydras in your deck, I don't know, right? But even then, the problem is this enchantment just costs too much mana.
It just costs too much. Even if you get a couple of triggers, it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, if this thing maybe costs 3 mana, then there is a world where you can, put some +1/+1 counters on things and have that double. But the fact that this costs 5, that's just way too much. This is kind of meant to double the loyalty on your planeswalkers and do fun stuff like that. But I just don't think it has a home in just normal draft.
F for Doubling Season. Next is Vivien Reid, 3 green for a 5 loyalty. Legendary Planeswalker Vivien at Mythic Rare, 3 activated abilities, +1. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land from among them and put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. So that's +1 draw card, but really good selection. -3, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. And -8, so this is the ultimate. It takes some work to get there, but you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2, have vigilance, trample, and indestructible. Vivien Reid is a awesome planeswalker. Really good in all settings, but particularly in limited, this card covers all the bases. It's really great. The +1, it churns through your deck. It gets you exactly what you need. It feels like every single time. At the point that you've got Vivien Reid on the battlefield, you really just want to find creatures. It's rare that you're digging for a land at that point, but you're never going to run out of gas. And then the -3, just having that catch-all within artifacts, enchantments, and creatures with flying just covers a lot of the random bases that you don't normally have. The only downside to Vivien Reid is that she doesn't protect herself naturally in most scenarios. Like she doesn't make a blocker or kill a creature.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, but the nice thing about Vivien is that her loyalty is extremely high.
Very high.
You play this on turn 5. Presumably you have I'm just assuming a natural game of Magic where you have a relatively even board of creatures, and you play this, and let's say even if they're up a creature and they're able to get some damage through, it's pretty unlikely for your opponent to be able to kill Vivien in one swing,
right?
6 unless you have no creatures in play, right?
Right.
So you get it up to 6. They have to make some weird attacks where they might lose some of their creatures just to get the loyalty on this down. But if they don't, this ticks up, and then the ultimate just wins you the game. Right. And this just has the broken wings clause, right? Where you can kill an artifact, enchantment, or creature. This just does so much. There is that one downside that you mentioned, and I don't know how many points you dock from a card like this, because it just gives you so much value and has so much utility, but doesn't impact the board the turn that you play it in all instances. But
yeah,
I would,
for me, it takes it from an A+ to an A.
Yeah.
I would give
that's
Vivien
kind
Reed
of what
an
I was going to say. I was wondering whether or not you would put it at A- because of the fact that it doesn't impact the board. It doesn't put a creature, or it doesn't protect itself. Sometimes it protects itself if you can kill a flyer. But other than that, I mean, this just gives you, when your opponent plays a Vivien, like, don't you just feel like conceding if you can't kill it right away?
Totally. Yeah. And, I think the key thing with Vivien specifically is that this card only costs 5 mana. Like, if Vivien was a 6 mana planeswalker, yeah, we'd be talking more about the A- range, because, like, that's a time in the game where you might just be dead if you pay 6 mana and don't affect the board directly. But coming down on 5, especially in green, where it could be turn 4 if you have Llanowar Elves or whatever, 6 loyalty is a lot at that stage of the game. And this is a similar card to ones that we've seen before, where, you get some value out of it. And then if it gets left unchecked, it usually only takes a couple of turns to kind of have taken over the game. So I like A for Vivien Reed.
Yeah, agreed.
Next is Quilled Great Worm. This is 4 green for a 7/7 worm at Mythic rare. It's a trample. So 6 mana, 7/7 trample to start with. And it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. Are you kidding me? And then it says, you may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the way that this card works, it basically means your opponents can't jump block, right? Because if you have big creatures in play and your opponents jump block, your creatures will just get gigantic, right? It'll just get all the extra +1/+1 counter. So the correct way to play against this card is just make sure you make all the proper blocks where the creatures actually trade. Because if that creatures actually trade, then they won't actually
if they die, they don't get the counters. Yeah.
Exactly. Because you can see it actually says in parentheses, it must survive to get the counters.
Yeah.
Which is huge. Because you could read this and be like, wait a second, do my creatures never take damage? Like,
right.
They just naturally always get bigger. So that's kind of the way to play around this. But 6 mana for 7/7 Trampler. Obviously, this thing hits extremely hard. I'm curious to see how this card will actually play out, in the sense that your opponents will just make the blocks that they can make, but it does make blocking more difficult, and it's just a giant creature. And I'm also wondering how often you're actually going to realistically be able to cast this out of the yard. I don't know that happens too often.
Yeah.
And
it's a weird scenario, because it feels like you cast Quilled Great Worm, you attack. Anything that gets through just gets doubled up, right?
Right.
So, like, if you have a 3/3 and it connects with the opponent, it's just a 6/6 now with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Anything that didn't trade and survived combat and dealt any damage gets, doubled up. So now you've got that in the bag if you've managed to get any of those counters. The weird thing is that if they go, okay, untap, kill your Quilled Great Worm, like, are you losing? Like, don't you just win because you have this huge board and you don't want to actually cash in the counters for the Quilled Great Worm again? Like,
right.
Maybe you just run it back or whatever. But it just seems like if you get to play this as, first main phase Quilled Great Worm attack you, if you have anything going attacks-wise, anything, that your creature could survive combat, that's it. Whether it hits the player, whether it bounces off one of their things, whether it gets chumped, anything, then all of a sudden, your board state is just doubled up and you're going to win the next turn.
Yeah, the issue with this card is just, it is very good if you are ahead on board, right? If your creatures are, and generally green's going to have the bigger creatures, but if you have a bigger board than your opponent, this card is amazing, because they just cannot chump with their cat tokens or anything along those lines, because your creatures are just going to continue getting bigger. But if you're kind of at parity, this doesn't really do anything. Right? Like, if you have a board of a bunch of 3/3s and they have a board of a bunch of 3/3s, what do you attack, and then they block, and then that's it, right?
Well, then you have a 7/7 Trampler.
No. Yeah. So what I'm saying is the stat line is already pretty solid, right? Because we're used to Colossal Dreadmod common, and that's just a perfectly fine top end level creature. A 6 mana for a 7/7 Trampler does hit extremely hard, and this is just gravy, right? This is just extra that you have. I'm just wondering how much extra is this effect, right? It's a good body, and when you're ahead on board, this shuts the door down. But when it's kind of even, it is just a big 6 mana 7/7 trampling creature.
I mean, how does it like what do you mean with the disincentive for them to chump block? Because if they take the damage, the creature gets big too, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. No. I misread that effect.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I thought it was combat damage to a player. No.
To a creature. Yeah, right. It's just like all it has to do is just hit. It's like
you're right. You're absolutely right.
What is going on with this card?
Whenever a creature control deals combat damage. Okay, never mind this. Right. Okay, so I went from considering giving this a B.
Yeah, it's getting upgraded.
It's getting an upgrade here. I'm gonna adjust my spreadsheet here real quick.
I will say though, what you said is true, which is that this still only counts on your turn, so you do still need to have the ability to attack and not have your creature die to take full advantage, right?
Right.
The only difference between what you were saying before and now is just that it just leaves your opponent no options if their creatures are smaller. If you do have attacks, and you don't need many of them, right? It's just really one thing that can, again, attack without dying, and you're fine.
Right. Yeah, you still have to be ahead on board, right?
You do.
Like you still just need to have larger creatures than your opponent to actually have this card be effective. But again, the floor of this just being a 6 mana 7/7 trample is also just a card that you're always going to play in your green decks anyways.
Exactly.
So but it looks flashy and it's mythic. It's got a lot of words, but I think this might be like a B+ or something.
B+. That's what I like too, because it really only counts on your turn. So, the way I view it is this. You play it. If you are ahead in any way, shape, or form, this will mostly close the game out. Which is nice, but that is not something that we value super highly, win more-ish type cards. But they put this on a 7/7 trample. So if they don't kill it and you get to untap, this is going to be the biggest thing on the battlefield. You get to attack with your other creatures alongside the Quilled Great Worm, because there's no way that they can just take a hit from this without throwing 3 creatures in front or whatever. So I don't see any way around it for your opponent. This is still a must kill, and it could have a dramatic impact on the game the turn that you cast it, where the window may not be open for them to kill it. So that for me puts it into that B+ A- range. Also, just based on stats, it is massive. 7/7 trample for 6 is a nice card, especially in a core set, like where it's just a lot of times it comes down to just beef, who has more creatures on the battlefield and bigger. So I would
Marshall,
say,
go ahead. There's an uncommon that's bigger than this creature, Marshall.
Yeah, so there you go. So I would say B+ A- range for Quilled Great Worm. Kind of feel it out as we play it out. Next is Preposterous Proportions. This is 5 green, so again 7 mana for a sorcery. It's rare. It says creatures you control get +10/+10 and gain vigilance until end of turn. This is some type of win con for a tokens deck or something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you draft some kind of a white-green deck with the Prideful Parents and have some ways to go wide, and let's say you have some Llanowar Elves that can kind of help get you to 7 mana, this could be some way to close out the game. The problem is it just costs 7 mana.
It's 7 mana.
It's just it's so much. Maybe it's better in sealed deck, right, where you can just kind of get to that point. The games go a little longer, but in draft, if you're playing a deck that's wanting to get to 7 mana, you're likely going to have a deck that has the bigger creatures anyways, right? And if you want to play a deck that's trying to keep its mana curve low,
you don't want.
Is this card even better than Giant Growth?
No way.
Right?
No, I would bet a lot of money that Preposterous Proportions is, way worse than Giant Growth on average. In any deck. It creates 2 interesting mini games, right? One of them is, can I get to 2 creatures more than my opponent and relatively have the shields down for them? Because then it's like, oops, I win, right? Maybe 1 creature, depending on if you've gotten in for some earlier damage. The other one that it can create is, how many creatures do I have with Trample? Because a 1/1 with Trample becomes, lethal-ish, and any 2 Trample creatures become pretty much GG if you can pull this off. None of that seems compelling to me. It also suffers dramatically from the I'm behind situation. It does make your opponent block. It does. Right? We're looking at it as, well, you don't necessarily win the game the turn you cast it. But it does have that effect that Overrun has, where even if you don't win the game the turn you cast it, it does leave your opponent mostly decimated. Right? If you have 4 creatures and you cast this, it's like they can't just be like, I'll just take it. Right? Like they're dead.
This will absolutely like, let's say you have 4 creatures in play and then you cast this card. It's going to eat 3 creatures, right? It is, but it requires you to have 4 creatures in play and be able to cast this. And the vigilance is really nice too, because they can't just kind of chump block to survive and attack you back for lethal, because all your creatures are going to be alive. They're going to survive combat and they will be able to block. So there is definitely some upside here.
Is this actually okay?
Build around it. Yeah, so now I'm thinking,
is this the green plague win, Paul? Like, what is happening right now?
So it kind of forces a block. Well, note that I did play against this card and I boarded an Aetherize.
Oh,
that was a nice sideboard card.
There's a lot of cards that'd be good against.
Yeah. So maybe
I'm interested now.
Yeah. So maybe, like you said, maybe this is not really the type of card that you want in the most aggressive decks necessarily. Like, the thing is, this card might just be fine if you're just doing a mid-range green deck with some acceleration here and there, and then let's say you just have just a board of some creatures, and let's say you have a couple of tramplers or whatever, this can kind of close out the game. So, this probably goes into a build around, maybe it's like a C
plus.
I don't want to go too high on this.
No, I don't either. It's still 7 mana and very conditional.
Right. But
it might be the green plague
wind.
It might be the green plague wind. We don't know. Last green card. Yes. Last green card is Galta, Primal Hunger. It's 10 green for a 12/12 trampler. It's a legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur at rare. And it says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So where's the inflection point?
So let's say you can kind of curve out, just ideal scenario here. Turn 2, you play a 2/2. Turn 3, you play a 3/3. Turn 4, it still costs 7 mana. So you're going to need to have basically 3 creatures in play. And once you have 3 creatures in play, it's going to cost somewhere between 5 to 6 mana, 4 to 6 mana, somewhere around there. So that's kind of what you need. And, that is a pretty decent ask. There are plenty of game states where that does happen. And then when you play this will likely run away with the game. But at the same time, if your opponent's aware that you have cards like this in your deck, then it becomes easier for them to just go, you know what, I need to fire off my removal spell early. And then all of a sudden you just have a card that's going to be really, really hard to cast. So there's definitely counterplay to this. In a best of 1 setting, like we play on MTG Arena, that's not going to matter as much. But if you're playing best of 3 and you know that your opponent has Galta in their deck, you're going to start shocking their things more aggressively, and all of a sudden their quote-unquote best card just gets stranded kind of in their hand. But of course, if you ever get this in play, right? You ever just get this in play, just cast it. It doesn't matter. You play this for 6 mana even. This will just kind of win you the game if your opponent doesn't have the removal spell. So, but it does have some setup cost here.
Yeah, I would feel like the 7 mana spot would be like, I'd like to have it in a ramp deck or something where if I could get it to 7 mana for a 12/12 trample, I'm probably happy, and I would pay 6 all day, all night. Anything below that would just be like, a 5 mana 12/12 trample is just like off the charts good. So, for me, as long as I felt like I could have a deck that could get to the 7 mana range, through combination of creatures being on the board and ramp or lands or whatever, then I would probably be pretty happy with Galta. And anything outside of that, I would be down on Galta a bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think I would give Galta a little bit of a build around, heavy creature deck, ramp deck, something like that. That's not a full build around, but it's like a consideration. It's probably like a B.
I was going to give it a B.
Yeah. 12/12 trample is legit.
It is huge, but the fail case happens more often than most people would care to admit.
Definitely.
Right? It's just like, if you're on the draw, you just have to block, right? You have to trade. If your opponent's playing a red-white aggro deck, you just have to block. They have a combat trick. They attack through your creatures. If your 2s, 3s, and 4s all trade, all of a sudden, this is just, you just never even get to cast this card. So that's kind of the downside of this card. But of course, there are plenty of games where you also play it and you just win the game.
Right. That's it for green. That'll move us to white. Our first card is called Authority of the Consuls. It is white for an enchantment. It says creatures your opponents, it's rare. Creatures your opponents control enter tapped. And whenever a creature an opponent controls enters, you gain a life. That's just an F, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do enough for it to be justify worth a card. It doesn't matter the mana cost on it. Next is Crystal Barricade. This is 1 and a white for a 0/4 artifact creature wall at rare. I love seeing walls again. It has Defender, which means it can't attack. And it says you have hexproof, so that you, the player, can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. And it says prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. So is this a sideboard card against red? Like, just to cut to the chase, would you even bring this in?
This is a constructed card.
Okay.
This is a card that was made just to put into sideboards of constructed decks. The Ivory Mask hexproof effect can be pretty strong, and maybe you don't get comboed out, right?
Okay.
So that's like another thing where you have this in play. You can't die to a grape shot or something like that. So I would just give this card an F. You just don't want to play 2 mana 0/4 walls in your deck.
It's a tough start for white. Double F. Yeah. Let's see if we can
better, I promise.
Improve it. Next is Giada, Font of Hope. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature angel at rare. She's got flying and vigilance, and each other angel you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each angel you already control. And you can tap Giada to add white, spend this mana only to cast an angel spell. This was from New Capenna.
Yeah.
Where she was
this card it's just 2 mana for a 2/2 flying vigilance is just a great creature, right? That's just you're just super, super happy to play that. But on top of that, there's just a common angel that you're going to always play in your decks, right? There's a 3 mana 2/3 flyer. Mm-hmm. There's a 4 mana 3/3. Maybe you won't play that as often, but there's also a 4 mana 3/4 uncommon flyer. Mm-hmm. That's an angel. So there's enough angels where you have a 2 mana 2/2 flying vigilance, which you're super happy playing with. But every now and then, if you just get 1 +1/+1 counter on one of those angels, this card's ridiculous.
Right, because that's a flying +1/+1 counter. Yeah. And you maybe even played that card a turn sooner than you normally would and still got to attack with Giada. I mean...
Yeah, I would give this an A-.
I think so too. B+ A- range for Giada. As you said, I mean, you're already at a B just for a 2/2 flying vigilance for 2, and there's significant upside here. Slight build around component with that. Next is Sky Knight Squire. This is 1 and a white for a 1/1 cat scout at rare. And it says whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So you play the Squire on 2 and it's going to get a counter for every creature entering after that. And then it says, as long as this creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has flying and is also a knight. Jeez, that's a scary 2-drop to play.
I mean, it's another one of those kind of you have to kill this card. Imagine just curving out Sky Knight Squire into Prideful Parent, right?
Oh,
all of a sudden you have a 2 mana 3/3, and then turn 4 you play the Felidar, right? The +1/+1 counters. You just win the game at that point. Totally. So and all this card asks you is to just put creatures in your deck,
right?
Or even if you can just find ways to incidentally put counters on this. By putting that third counter, it gets flying too. So you have a 2-drop that can just potentially win the game by itself, because it's not going to be long before this thing is just randomly a 4/4 flyer. That's a lot of mileage that you're getting out of a 2-drop. So
B+, A-. Yeah, I would say A-. Yeah. This is just one of the scariest things you can see on turn 2. This card's also scary. Ajani, Color of the Pride. This is 1 white for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, legendary planeswalker Ajani at Mythic. 3 activated abilities, +1 loyalty is put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. -3, which we'll note leaves Ajani still on the battlefield, says target creature gains flying and double strike until end of turn. And then you can -8. This is very difficult to get to, but you get to create X 2/2 white cat creature tokens where X is your life total. But focusing on the first 2, I mean, this is a 3-drop planeswalker. Admittedly hard to cast at 1 double white, but you get to start just spamming +1/+1 counters. And in the rare case where you just don't have anything to put it on, you still get to bump the loyalty up even if you don't put the counter down. And then the -3 is usually a game ender right? Like it's like, okay, I'm going to kind of maneuver myself to this position where I can -3 and just kill you.
Yeah, and just it itself being a planeswalker means the game just changes to how can I kill the Ajani, which the thing about that too is when your opponent plays that sub game with you of try to kill the Ajani and do everything they can to kill the Ajani, you're not taking the damage. Right? You're just all of a sudden gaining 5, 6, 7 life. So if you think about it in that context, it's a 3-mana planeswalker that's going to gain you 5 life. And then also give 2+1/+1 counters at the minimum. So it's just it's a very problematic creature to play around. It's a little bit difficult to cast, and obviously you do need to have some creatures in play to kind of get this to work. But if you do, this card is just really, really strong and can just kind of close out games by itself as well. I don't know. Is this another A-?
Yeah, it is. It's another A- because this doesn't catch you up or anything, but this is, again, one of the scariest things you could see on turn 3. Next is Arabo, maybe, the First Fang. This is 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature cat avatar at rare. It says other cats you control get +1/+1. And whenever Arabo or another non-token cat you control enters, create a 1/1, in this case 2/2, white cat creature token.
This card's incredible.
That's insane.
It's a 2 and a white for a 2/2. That's a cat lord. It makes a token. So just by itself, it's giving you 4 power and 4 toughness for 3 mana, which you don't get very often in white.
No way. That's incredible.
Then you just play another cat on the following turn, and it pumps out another token, which is a 2/2.
That's wild. Yes,
I mean, this card's an A at least.
Definitely. I mean, this is just on rate. And especially given what this deck wants to do, go wide, make tokens, etc., is it going to be an A? I would just say it's an A because the build around portion is probably difficult. I don't know how many cats there are. There are definitely some in the set, but it would seem difficult that you're just going to have like 12 cats in the deck and this thing's just going to be, in that case, it's an A+, like it's off the charts.
So that's the thing though. We talk about how elves aren't necessarily super supported. Cats are. There are 3 common cats. So there's the 2-mana 1/1 that draws you a card. There's the Prideful Parent that makes the token. And then the Felidar, the lifelinker, which is also an incredible common. They're all good commons.
Wow.
Like white is one of the strongest colors. They're all good commons and they're all cats. Wow. So I think you have, this has, like I said, minimum A, possibly A+, just given the fact that all 3 common cats are cards you're happy playing in your deck.
Yeah, I would give Arbo an A, and I would say A+ if you build around it. It'll be the best card in your deck if you build around it. That is a monster. Next is Celestial Armor. This is 2 and a white for an artifact equipment, or first equipment here. It is rare. It actually has flash. And to skip to the equip cost, it's very expensive. It's 3 and a white to equip. So what do we get? It says when it enters, attach it to target creature you control. So you get the first one for free. And it says that creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And the equipped creature, so that's actually not part of the equipment though, right? That just happens as a temporary effect. Okay. And then it says the equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has flying. Wow. Yeah. That's good. I mean,
this is like the best combat trick ever, right?
Seriously.
It's an instant speed equipment that basically you play this and you kill your opposing creature, an opponent's creature, right? They attack you play this, it pumps your creature's indestructible. You trade, or not, you don't trade actually. Their creature dies because your creature's indestructible. And then you've also just created a flying threat.
Wow.
So this card is really, really strong.
That's incredible.
White wants to be proactive. This is just the best combat trick that also just is an equipment. So randomly, I'm going to guess that because this is a more of a set that's similar to core set, you might have some board stalls. This card just breaks that open as well, right? All of a sudden, you just put this on one of your creatures and then you just start attacking with it. And that can also threaten to kind of take over the game. So I think in any deck that's playing creatures or is looking to be somewhat aggressive, this is a very, very good card.
This looks like it's hard to get up into this range, but this looks like a B+ to me, Celestial Armor.
Yeah. I think this is somewhere
I just
B plus
think
A minus possibly
because I just think you're going to be able to get a card out of this most of the time that you cast it, right? If they use a removal spell, you respond, you got the card. If they block, you play this, you kill their creature, you got a card. And then the thing it leaves behind is very relevant. Yes, it's very expensive, but +2/+0 and flying is like perfect. That's like, that is what you want out of equipment.
And the thing is, let's say you kind of try to set up a scenario where you pass and you keep up Celestial Arbor and your opponent maybe chooses not to play around it. You can still just kind of run this out end of turn.
Sure.
Right.
You
You're just like, all right,
threat.
Well, you didn't run into my quote unquote trick, but I still gave my creature wings and I'm attacking you. And it's not even a 2-for-1 because if you kill my creature, I can still at some point pay the mana to give something else flying and try to threaten the game. So yeah, I think B plus, possibly A minus, depending on kind of the nature of the format.
Yes, this could easily be a bomb level. That's a very pushed card, Celestial Armor. Next is, well, kind of the opposite. It's Day of Judgment. This is 2 white for a sorcery. At rare, it says, destroy all creatures. How good is Day of Judgment in Modern Era Limited? I mean, this is a core set. You would think that a sweeper would be excellent in this type of format.
Yeah, I noticed this format, it's pretty creature centric. There's just lots of creatures in all different colors because, of course, that's the basics of Magic, right? You just want to play your creatures and play into the synergies of the creatures that you're playing. So I do think Day of Judgment is actually quite good in this specific format. In other formats where, Duskmourn or some of the other sets where every creature comes into play and gives you some value in some way, then maybe this is not as effective. Where because your opponents are still just holding 4 cards in their hand. I have found that that's not necessarily the case here. I found plenty of games where I'm just trying to top deck something to try to break through a stalemate or something along those lines. And in those instances, I think a sweeper can actually be pretty good here. So I do think Day of Judgment is a pretty solid card in the context of the format, but noting that white as a color is pretty aggressive, right?
Yeah, heavily
white wants to attack. There's not a ton of cards that kind of pushes you into the direction of a more controlling deck. You have your Banishing Light, the Seize from Slumber variant. You want to be playing cards like that. Maybe the 2-mana 1/1 that draws you a card. You want to kind of play cards like that to support the Day of Judgment. You don't want to just put Day of Judgment in your green-white go wide deck or your red-white deck. But hey, if you drafted a blue-white control deck, or maybe a black-white mid-range deck, I do think Day of Judgment can be very good if you build around it.
What kind of grade would you give it?
I would give it a build around A minus, B plus, somewhere around there.
That's where I think too, because this is obviously one of the more powerful effects that you can have access to. It's just somewhat conditional.
Yeah.
Next is Exemplar of Light. This is 2 white for a 3/3 angel. It's rare. It's got flying. It says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on this creature, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. Wow. So this turns life gain instances into card draw plus counters. That's nuts.
Yeah. So kind of the dream scenario here is to play the common 3-mana 2/3 angel, which says whenever another creature comes into play, you gain a life. So you play that on turn 3. You play this on turn 4. You have a 4/4 flyer that's drawing you a card for 4 mana. Wow. That's insane, right? If you can pull that off, that is incredible. The other thing you can do is just have a Healer's Hawk in play.
Yeah.
Right? You have a Healer's Hawk in play. You play this on turn 4, you attack, and then you gain the life and you draw a card. So there's 2 commons that work really well with this, where I think this card has a lot of potential. There, obviously you're thinking about the cases where this won't come into effect, but the fact that there are 2 commons that work with this is nice. And additionally, the draw card effect triggers off of any +1/+1 counter. So there are other ways in the format to put +1/+1 counters on this other than gaining life. So if you play, let's say, the Felidar 2/3 cat that puts +1/+1 counters on things, you still draw a card there. If you have the combat trick, the 1 white, put a +1/+1 counter, prevent combat damage, that also gives us a card. So I think there's enough going there where I think if you ever get a counter on this, that's all you need. Right? You just need that 1 counter, and this card is great. Obviously, 2 double white for a 3/3 flyer is not quite good enough on rate just because of how hard it is to cast. But I think there's enough ways to put a counter on this where you have to consider the upside here, because I think it will happen a fair amount of the time.
Definitely. And getting the card back, such a game changer. Like you mentioned the hawk scenario. I mean, I could see just attacking my hawk into its own death just to get the trigger, right? Like I'll just cash in the hawk here and get this. Exemplar of Light. Yeah, this, it has two separate build around components, but it makes me think that if this is put into a normal deck that you won't have to work hard to get that. Maybe you would hedge a couple of picks during the draft if you had an exemplar for a little bit of life gain or counters, but like that will happen somewhat naturally. So I wouldn't even consider this necessarily a build around. Man, I think I would give Exemplar of Light just an A. Like it's already close. Like it's just one +1/+1 counter puts it over the top.
Yep. Yeah, I would probably give this an A-, only because it still requires another card for it to actually still be good. Yeah. Given that they're both commons that you're reasonably happy playing with anyways. Especially if you pair this in green, white, or black, white. Green has additional ways to put counters on things, right? You've got that unicorn that's an uncommon. You play it on turn 3, you play this on turn 4, and then black also will occasionally have some ways to drain your opponents as well, right? There's the 2-mana 1/3, which you don't really want to play. When it attacks, you drain them for 1. But with the Exemplar of Light, maybe you can find a way to kind of make it work. So definitely. I think it's very, very good. But given that it's slightly difficult to cast, and given that it still requires you to have that component, something. Just it puts me down just a little bit on the card.
Okay, A-. I agree with you. You convinced me for Exemplar of Light. Next is Raise the Past. This is 2 white for a sorcery at rare. And it says, return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I generally don't like cards like this.
No, what are you even supposed to do here? Is there some deck that can turbo mill itself where you can get a bunch of cards back?
Probably constructed.
Right. And if you get 2 creatures back, are you really doing it? It's just fine.
No.
Right? You've basically played the unsettling twins from the last set, right? You just got 2 2/2s in play. So I just don't think this is a card that you're really going to want to. There's also instances where this card just does absolutely nothing.
Right.
So I would give this like a D or an F.
I would just give it an F. I mean, because the problem is if you try to build towards it, then you've probably just made your deck a lot worse.
Right. That's true.
Next is Valkyrie's Call. This is 3 white for an enchantment. It's mythic rare. And it says, whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. It has flying and is an angel in addition to its other types. Dang.
Yeah. So for an enchantment, for a 5-mana enchantment, obviously it doesn't do anything to your creatures right away, but it makes it so that if you attack, you're likely not going to get blocked or you get chump blocked. And then it's really hard to attack into because they're just going to block and all of a sudden have an army of flying angels to kind of get you back.
Right.
The question
any trades become amazing for you.
Right. The question is, how many times does this need to happen for it to be worth it for you to put a 5-mana enchantment in your deck, right?
That does nothing else.
Right, because if this was 5 mana to give one of your creatures a +1/+1 and flying, that's probably not good enough. But if you do it twice, it probably is, right?
Yeah, and it's hard because the math here gets weird. My number that came to mind is a little awkward, but it's 1.5. Because I'm thinking about it in terms of if you told me that I pay 5 mana, my creature would trade for one of theirs, but then mine would come back. Okay, well, I'm in, right?
Yeah.
And especially if I have the upside of doing that again later in the game or something. But if you told me that one of my creatures was small and chump blocked and then came back a little bit better, I'm like, I need to do that a couple of times. That's going to have to happen 2 or 3 times before I'm happy with this card. So gets very, very conditional. I guess I really want to know how it plays out in a real game where, let's say I just have a board state of 2 or 3 creatures and they do too. And I say Valkyrie's Call, what actually happens?
So I played against this card.
Okay. So what happened? How did it play? I didn't block. I just raced my opponent. You didn't trade?
I just raced my opponent. I Yeah, I did in trade. So my opponent had this in play, and they had some smallish creatures in play, and I was just like, well, I'm not going to block their 2/2 and turn it into a 3/3 flyer. Even if I eat the 2/2, I just don't want them to have a 3/3 flyer. So I just chose not to block and tried to clear out, kind of try to find some way to attack back. But it did make combat really, really complicated, and this seems like a pretty nightmarish card to play against. Right, because you're just like, what do I even do? Because there are going to be boards where you play this, and as an opponent, you're like, what do I even do? Like, I can't attack them. If I attack them, they're just going to have bigger creatures.
Your removal
if
sucks.
I don't, right? But it is you are putting a 5-mana enchantment in your deck, right? It's not just that is a pretty significant cost. But I think the upside is there if you just pack your deck full of a bunch of creatures, hopefully non-angel creatures. Right, because there's a lot of playable angels that you're going to want to put in your deck, and the more angels you have, the worse this card actually becomes.
But there's a decent chance that some of the best creatures in your deck are angels, based on what we've seen here too. Wow, this is an extremely difficult one to grade. I think my gut is that I would start out on the lower side of Valkyrie's Call. You know, I have a category, Paul, where it's kind of like you're going to have to beat me with this card. Like,
prove it.
I'm not really, prove it. I'm not really a believer, in some cards. This one looks pretty like it doesn't seem like there's a lot of great ways for your opponent to maneuver through this. That said, I don't like cards that give my opponent the agency to decide these things. I also don't like cards that don't really help if I'm behind. Like if I need Sarah Angel's in this set. Like what's going to have a higher win rate, Sarah Angel or Valkyrie's Call? Like I'd put all my money on Sarah Angel at the beginning of the format.
Right.
Just not knowing, never having played with Valkyrie's Call, or honestly, even with a card that reminds me of it. So I think this would be in the prove it category for me. So, I would give it somewhere in the C plus B minus range, just as just to put it in, to put a grade on it. But this is a card that I wouldn't be surprised, wouldn't be completely shocked if later in the format it was like, no, that card's really good. It's super annoying. There's no real way around it. And as long as you have enough creatures, it really performs. Or if it's like, it just doesn't do that much. And since it's face up on the table, people can just play around it enough so that it's not that good. Both of those outcomes seem to be on the table for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This card doesn't give you combat stats immediately, right? You just kind of play it and you're like, whew, my opponent didn't play a creature,
right?
Or my opponent didn't remove anything in play. It's one of those, if the board is relatively even, I can pick and choose my spots with what I choose to attack with, and then the opponents then have the decision as to whether or not they're okay taking that damage or blocking and trying to find a way to deal with the angel later.
Right. Yeah. So
C+,
we'll get back to you on C+,
we'll
something
see.
Like that. Last white card is Herald of Eternal Dawn. It's 4 white for a 6/6 angel. This is a mythic rare. It's 7 mana. It's got flash and flying, and it says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game.
Platinum Angel, baby.
Yeah, these are weird cards. They basically, as long as they're on the battlefield, if you can protect it, you will win. You can't lose by decking and your opponent can. So, that's inevitability personified. The problem, of course, is that if the game is going to go super long, they will eventually find an answer for it. It's also 7 freaking mana in a color that generally doesn't want to get anywhere near 7 mana with their stuff. I mean, just looking even at the rares where they go with the expensive, right? We did these in order, and it was 4-drop. Last few cards were 4-drop, 4-drop, 5-drop, 7, right? It's like this is the only one. I would start out down on Herald of Eternal Dawn. It's clearly powerful. You can flash it in, block a creature if you want. You can just have it be there, and if they don't have an answer for it, you could just win the game off of it alone. Literally, like you need nothing else. I don't see that actually happening very often. They're going to be able to kill it. It is going to be hard to protect it long term, and its mana cost is oppressive.
Yeah, I think this might have a home in like a blue-white deck, right? Where you're playing with a bunch of flyers. You're playing kind of that instant speed game. Maybe you have access to some counter magic where you can flash this and end of turn. And if you can protect it with counter magic, this is a real kind of win condition in kind of maybe a slower, more controlling deck. So I can see a world where this card can be good. It doesn't seem like the type of card that you're just going to put in any white deck, right? Especially white decks are trying to curve out with tokens and cats and beat people down. But if I took this, and I'm sure I will, just because it looks fun. I will get back to you and let you know kind of how it plays out. But I agree with you. 7 mana is a lot. It does have the ability to ambush things, right? And maybe that's kind of what you're going to be trying to look at this card as, right? A 7 mana, 6/6, eat something, and then use it as basically a dragon, just a way to just kind of close out the game. My game plan wouldn't be to just sit on this card and try to deck my opponent or anything, or go to -25 and just hope my opponent doesn't draw a removal spell. But hey, there is going to be an instance where your opponent's just like, a red-green beatdown deck might have trouble killing this card, right?
That's true.
They're like overrun. And you're like, whatever.
Yeah, take it all.
Take it all, beat you down, and maybe that'll be good enough.
I would start off Herald of Eternal Dawn at like a D. Meaning that, I'm kind of leaning on this is a card that often won't make the cut in your deck.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of decks where you don't play this card. If you can draft a deck around it, I can see kind of getting it up to a C+ level card.
Same. Maybe. Yeah, it is good if you can cast it.
Right, absolutely.
That'll move us to blue. Our first blue card is called Drake Hatcher. And this is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 human wizard at rare. It has vigilance and prowess. And it says, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many incubation counters on it. And you can remove 3 of those incubation counters to create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Yeah.
So this is, obviously the type of card that you want to be putting in a spells-based deck, kind of like a secret blue-red card, if you will, right? Where you want to be playing a lot of spells to be able to trigger the prowess. If you can pump it, use a pump spell on it, then you can also use that to make a Drake right away if it connects. But the problem is it needs to connect. It needs to hit the player to actually get the counters, which I misread when I first read the card. I thought it was when it deals combat damage, and this is combat damage to a player. And in a lot of instances, how many times are you going to actually have to connect to be able to make a Drake? That's kind of the way that I'm looking at it, right?
It's probably like 2, right?
Turn 3, you're not going to be able to make a Drake in most instances, right? And if you're close to making one, it's a 1/3. Your opponent can just block with their 3/3, and it's going to be pretty rare that you're going to have a double spell to turn this into a 3/5. So this card reads really exciting. There's lots of words, lots of exciting cards in a blue-red deck. I don't think it's bad by any means, just because a 2-mana 1/3 vigilance prowess with upside is nice. But I got to play with this card, and I just don't think it's quite as good as it looks. I'm going to give Drake-Catcher a B-.
Okay, I like B- for Drake-Catcher too. You do need to connect twice in most scenarios. That's hard to do. Yeah. Next is Kaito, Cunning Infiltrator. This is 1 blue for a 3 loyalty legendary Kaito at Mythic Rare. This one has 3 abilities and a static. So the static is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Kaito. Well, that's good. And then you can +1 it, and up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn, draw a card, then discard a card. So you get a loot plus you get a creature through, and then you'll get another loyalty. Basically, it's +2 loyalty if it connects. And then -2, you get a 2/1 blue ninja creature token, and then -9 if you're really popping off. You get an emblem with whenever a player casts a spell, you get a 2/1 blue ninja creature token.
Yeah, so I don't think you're going to get to the -9 that often.
Yeah,
it's a big ask. But one big note about this card is that when you read that +1/+1, when you read that +1 ability, that's just loot, because it says up to 1 target. It doesn't have to connect.
Sure.
So when you play this, it's just a planeswalker that can act as a looter, but can also protect itself by making a blue ninja token. So that's not necessarily the case that we've seen with other Kaitos in the past, where you kind of have to attack or connect to actually get that loot ability. Here, you can just play this as a planeswalker that loots, and then of course you always have to give this card extra points because it's a planeswalker, which kind of shifts the dynamic and gameplay of how you're supposed to play the rest of the game once this is in play. So I don't think these effects are super strong, but it's a 3 mana, makes a ninja. It allows you to loot every single turn, little difficult to cast. I would give Kaito like a B plus.
Yeah, B plus. And it is interesting, like if this card makes it into your blue-white flyers deck.
Oh, yes. Right.
Because now you actually could start to aim for the -9, right? Because like if you play it plus it, you get a ground creature through plus like a flyer in the air. That's 2 extra loyalty counters plus the +1. So it goes from 3 to 4, 5, 6, right?
Right. And then here's the thing too. Let's say you know, ideal world, you go 1, 2, turn 3 Kaito.
Mm-hmm.
If you attack with both of those creatures and they both somehow connect, then you don't even necessarily need to tick this up. You could also just make another ninja and this will still stay at 3 loyalty. So
Yeah,
I'm saying
that's true.
It'll still be kind of hard to kill. So
yeah,
I mean, I think this card has a decent amount of upside. It's not Chandra win the game on the spot type card,
Right.
but I think it's just a solid card that you're going to be happy with in any blue deck.
Yeah, B plus for Kaito, Cunning Infiltrator. Next is Kiora, the Rising Tide. This is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary Merfolk Noble at rare. When Kiora enters, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and she's got Threshold. Whenever Kiora attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may create Scion of the Deep, a legendary 8/8 blue octopus creature token. Nice.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously this is the type of card that you really want to be playing in, I guess, your blue-black decks, because that blue-black is the best at being able to kind of get Threshold. Mm-hmm. So let's say you go, you know, turn 2, some kind of creature, trade, play this turn 3. Is there a way to get Threshold on turn 4?
Probably, but
might
she
be.
helps a lot, but
right. Yeah,
probably not. I mean, it's not going to happen realistically.
Right. But the thing is, she helps you get Threshold, which that color combination already needs to do. And it's not through self-mill either. It's card selection. You're not up a card on the exchange, but you'd still get to kind of sculpt the hand that you want. So 3 mana for a 3/2, ETB, draw 2, discard 2. I'm just playing that card.
Definitely.
Right? That's just a card I'm pretty happy with playing. And then if you ever just trigger the Threshold, this card's great. Right. You just need to hit. You don't even. It doesn't even matter if they block with a 4/4. You're just getting an 8/8 for a 3 mana card.
Right. And you know, likely to die before then, but also a must kill. And like you said, sometimes you could surprise your opponent with it. You know, giving a card like this flash, you know, would be like absurd, right? Like because you could get both the creature to attack plus Threshold at instant speed, but as it sits, it's much worse than that. But still, this looks good to me. I have a feeling that making the 8/8 will happen almost never, but when it does, it's huge. And like you said, the floor is already high enough. I would say B plus for Kiora the Rising Tide, you know, assuming that you're in a Threshold deck.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think B plus, especially because if you're going to want to play this in a Threshold deck and you're blue-black, you'll likely also be maybe drafting some recursive effects.
Sure.
So if you can get Kiora back
That's
into
a great
play,
point.
eventually she's going to be able to make that 8/8, which can hopefully take over the game. So I think Kiora just kind of works really well with that, specifically in Dimir.
Lunar Insight is next. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery at rare. It says draw a card for each different mana value among non-land permanents you control. So you don't even get spotted the 0 for the land. Yeah, I would F for Lunar Insight. Next is High Fae Trickster. This is 3 and a blue for a 4/2 fairy wizard at rare. It has flash and flying. So 4 mana, 4/2 flash flying. And it says you may cast spells as though they had flash. That's a cool card.
Yeah, I mean, solid, just 4 mana, 4/2 flash flyer. And then it just makes the rest of the game an absolute nightmare for your opponent to play against, because you can play creatures as though they had flash.
You just say
so
go.
It's really hard for your opponents to attack you. They have to kill this card if they want to not just be afraid of everything. So I think this is a very solid card. I would give this a B plus.
Yeah, I like B for High Fae Trickster. 2 toughness is low.
Yeah,
Homunculus.
That's fair.
Homunculus Horde is next. This is 3 and a blue for a 2/2 Homunculus. It's rare. And it says whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature. That's really cool.
Is
it good?
Yeah, so the joke with this card is you need to be able to do this twice for it to be good.
To start popping off.
To start popping off. Because the first time you draw your second card, you play this turn 4, turn 5, you draw a card, you make a 2/2. So then you've paid 4 mana for 2 2/2s. But then the real value comes when you can make 2 more 2/2s, right? Because then you've paid 4 mana for 4 2/2s. But the thing is, how often does that happen, right? You need to have kind of the draw card deck to really have this go off. And there's going to be plenty of instances where this is just a 4 mana 2/2. And if you're on the draw, it's just like embarrassingly bad on stats. I just don't think this card is very good.
It's bad.
I would give this a D.
I would give it a D. I would give it a build around if you had repeatable ways to draw your second card, like looters. If it's a card draw spell, I would be much less down. But if I have 3 ways to loot every turn, like a creature that says draw a card, discard a card, or whatever, the planeswalker, something like that, now I'm looking at Homunculus Horde going, okay, if I can assemble this 2-card combo and just keep doing it, they have to break this up or they lose. It's a little bit better. It's not a lot better. It's only a little bit better. Because the problem is, if they break up the looting side of it, then you still have the stupid side of it, which is your 4 mana 2/2.
Just compare this card though to the Mischievous Fairies or whatever. It's like 1 in a blue for a 2/1 flyer. When you draw your second card, make a 1/1 flyer.
Yeah.
Like that card is a million times better.
It's a joke. Yeah. And like you said, you're on the draw and you go Homunculus Horde, your opponent's like, okay,
you lose.
Yeah. So go D on Homunculus Horde and the build around like D+. It's just bad. Next is Sphinx of Forgotten Lore, which really seems like a card that they've printed before, but I don't think it is. It's 2 blue for a Sphinx. It's mythic rare. It is a 3/3 with flying and flash. So 4 mana 3/3 flash flyer, already pretty good. This will eat a 1/1 or a 2/2 a decent chunk of the time. But then it says, whenever this creature attacks, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. Wow. This thing is just a value engine. I mean, none of these are like unbelievable take over the game, oh my God stuff, but all of this adds up to like, you flash it and you block a creature, you eat something small, or you just change the board, or you get to keep up card draw or counter spell and then cast this if they don't do it. And then you get to flash back a thing every once in a while. None of these are like incredible, but they add up to a good chunk of value and certainly worth the 4 mana.
Yeah, this card just, if you can just flash back 1 card out of this, it's I've had this card just completely take over games. My opponent played this and their graveyard was 2 Abrades and a Burst Lightning. And I didn't have a removal spell in my hand. I'm like, I guess I just lose.
Yeah, then you're done.
Yeah. So there's obviously very, very high upside with this card too. You typically want to play it in a deck that's got more spells, obviously, because you really want to leverage the flashback ability. Maybe in a blue-white deck that's got slightly less spells, or a blue-green deck, this card isn't quite as good. But I think in a deck that, it's got 6 or 7 spells, a blue-red deck or a blue-black deck is where this really shines. Then you can get it up to like an A- level card.
Okay, yeah, I like A- for Sphinx of Forgotten Lore, especially if you put a little work into it. Next is Archmage of Runes. This is 3 blue for a 3/6 giant wizard at rare. It says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Okay, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Okay. I mean, 5 mana 3/6 is like kind of interesting just because it's such a good blocker. But now you're giving me a reason to want this game to go long.
Yeah. I mean, if you can the thing is, once you start finding some spells, they'll just chain you into more spells.
Right.
And if you have this in your opening hand, then you can also just make sure you keep some spells in your hand and play all your other creatures first, just so that you can kind of get this in play. And this card's also really hard to kill. Like 6 toughness is a lot.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot. So, most of the red spells won't be able to kill it. And if you ever just kind of untap and play a couple of spells off of this card, you're just going to kind of run away with the game. Now, there will also just be instances where, because this costs 5 mana, maybe you don't have a spell to follow this up with, because maybe you've kind of had to cast your spell before. Mm-hmm. But this is certainly a card that I'm going to take really early and try my best to draft the coolest, sweetest spells deck and draw as many cards as possible with this card. I think the fact that they made this a 3/6 is a huge part of why I think this card is really good.
Yes.
Just because it just means that it can actually just block you just don't feel too bad about blocking most things.
This could have been an enchantment.
Yeah, and it can block little creatures plus combat spells.
Yeah.
I've played the 3 mana 06 Scrywall. That thing just blocks for days.
Right.
And this is kind of in kind of a similar boat here. So I think this card's pretty solid. Not quite A level for me. I think it's still maybe in the kind of the A- territory, but build around, of course. If you need to have a lot of spells to actually have this be good. If you're playing a deck that's only got 4 or 5 spells, then you're kind of sliding down kind of towards that B+ range. Okay.
I agree. I was going to ask you about that, but you answered my question. So build around B+ for Archmage of Runes. Next is Curator of Destinies. This is 4 blue for a 5/5 flying Sphinx at rare that can't be countered. We don't really care about that generally, but 5/5 flyer for 6 is good. And then it says, when this creature enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library and separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile in your hand and the other into your graveyard. These are so nasty.
Just so many mind games that you can do with this card. That's a game in of itself, and a completely different skill set where it takes some time to be able to do that right. But no matter what, we're talking about a 6 mana 5/5 flyer that will at minimum get you 2 cards, right? That's a 6 mana 5/5 flyer that will get you at minimum 2 cards, and sometimes it'll get you 3 if somehow you like the top 5 cards are all good cards and you showcase them another bomb, and then the face down pile has 3 other random cards in it. So this card just gets you a ton of value. There's not that many ways to draw a ton of cards in this set, and I feel I'm liking blue so far. Just from the drafts that I've done. And this is just another card that you play this, and it's just so hard to overcome just the card advantage that you get out of this, right? Compare this to Shivan Dragon, right? That's just a 6 mana vanilla 5/5 flyer. Obviously, that's an uncommon, but you're still going to play that in your deck. This card just has so much more to it. I would probably give this an A.
I would too. I think that when you have a dragon level card stats wise, and then you add, minimum 2 cards of card advantage to it, that's an A. I don't need anything more than that in my life, Paul. I'm happy with Curator of Destinies.
Giant Muldrifter.
Right, exactly. Next is Extravagant Replication. This is 4 blue for an enchantment at rare. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of another target non-land permanent you control. Dang, you got to wait till your upkeep, though?
Yeah, you have. So that's the thing. You play this, doesn't impact the board at all. And for you to feel like you're actually getting good value out of this, you need to copy 2 things, right? So you need to wait kind of 2 turn cycles. It does give you kind of inevitability, right?
It does.
You just, if you play this out on turn 6, particularly if I don't think blue-green is necessarily super strong, but if you can ramp into this, right, then that's even better. And then you can just kind of go off. And one note that you can't copy itself.
Oh, okay. That's funny.
You can't just try to multiply and go kind of crazy with this card. But I just think it's a little bit too slow.
It is.
I like value cards, but I like value cards like Curator of Destinies, which gives you a body in the cards immediately.
Totally.
Whereas this one's kind of delayed. And also sometimes you're just not going to have good creatures in play.
Yeah, good anything's in play.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe this is like a D.
It's a D. This fits that. We've now had, white didn't have one, I don't think, but the other 2 colors that we've done have, where they have these pie in the sky build arounds that I love to have in the set. They're not good. Like if you're playing at a GP or PT or, an arena open, you're generally you see Extravagant Replication and you're like, yeah, whatever. Like I'm not even looking at that. But if it's draft number 40 and you're making a YouTube video, you're looking at Extravagant Replication, like, let's do it. Here we go. And we've had 3 cards that fit that same bill. From a dry perspective of, is this card good? They generally don't play well. Next is Time Stop. What a weird card. This is from before my time. It's 4 blue for an instant. And literally the text is, it's a rare. The text is end the turn. That's the rules text. That's what it does.
I love it.
In parentheses, it explains what that actually means, which is it says, exile all spells and abilities, including this spell. The player whose turn it is discards down to their maximum hand size. Damage heals and, quote, this turn, and, quote, until end of turn effects end. This is like one of the worst ideas ever. Like none of those things, like we never use the term heals right? Oh, but my creature healed. Like it just happens, right? Like we don't have to say that. That said, it's interesting. The way I understand this card, Paul, is that you play it on like your opponent's upkeep, and it effectively like you kind of get a time walk out of it.
Yeah, that's a thing. I mean, you're paying 6 mana for kind of a time walk.
Yeah.
Your opponent can still get to untap though, right? That's the thing. No matter what, they still get to untap. If you cast Time Stop on their upkeep, they will miss their draw step. They won't be able to attack you or anything like that. So in some instances, it's just worse than Time Warp in most instances, right?
Yeah.
But then you can also use this as a counter spell, where basically if your opponent plays something and it's on the stack, you just end a turn, right? So you may wait until your opponent, like on their turn, to put something on the stack, and then you just say, okay, I'm going to get this spell and whatever else you were going to do for the rest of this turn. Yeah. Or it doesn't exist in this format, but let's say your opponent played something like an Emrakul.
I see.
And there's the Emrakul trigger on the stack. So I think it's a niche sideboard card that came into play in Champions Block Constructed, where there were some dragon triggers you wanted to counter or something along those lines. But largely, this is an overcosted Time Warp effect or a 6 mana counterspell, neither of which I'm too excited playing in limited. So I think I've already seen 2 of my opponents play this card. It was awful both times. I think people should not put this card in their deck.
This is a classic FPS, fancy play syndrome. I'm going to get cute card, but it doesn't really translate to wins. I'll give it a D. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking of, but let's just call it a D for Time Stop. And we can go down 1 grade for the next one. It is Omniscience. This is 7 blue. So 10 mana for an enchantment at Mythic. It says you may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. There's 2 obvious things, but we'll just mention them. One of them is this costs 10 mana, so that's basically impossible to get on the battlefield. And then by the time you get 10 mana and have this on the battlefield, you won't have anything left in your hand to cast anyway. So this is an interesting combo card for Constructed, but it's an F for us limited players. Last straight up color is black. Our first card is Tiny Bones Bauble Burglar. Nice name. This is 1 and a black for a 1/3 legendary skeleton rogue at rare. And it has a lot of text. It says, whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it. During your turn, you may play cards you don't own with stash counters on them from exile, and mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. And as you may imagine, you can pay 3 and a black and tap Tiny Bones to have each opponent discard a card at sorcery speed. This is slow, but it is an engine. Is it worth it for the 2 mana?
That's the thing. Your opponent kind of sees it coming, right? It's just you have this in play and they go, okay, I guess I'll just keep a land in my hand and you'll just get to play a land. It's extremely slow. I guess it combos if you have like the Mind Rot, right? If you have a way to have them discard multiple cards. But I think for the most part, you just kind of look at this as a 2 mana 1/3 body in the ultra late game. Every now and then it'll be somewhat effective, but I'm not super high on this effect. Also, the discard effect is a sorcery speed effect. How often are you going to be able to afford to just tap your 1/3 on turn? You're not doing this turn 4, right?
No way.
Tap this, don't add to the board and have them discard 1 card. That's so inefficient. So I just don't think this card is that strong. I mean, you're just kind of playing this as for its body. And then every now and then you get to maybe pick off a card. And what does that put that at? Like a D+ level card?
D+, I would say. C- in if you have a Mind Rot or something.
Some Burglar Rats.
Yeah. Too slow. Next is Zul Ashur Lich Lord. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 legendary zombie warlock at rare. It says ward, pay 2 life, and you can tap Zul to cast target zombie creature card from your graveyard this turn.
So that is an extremely powerful ability. But I did some homework here. I looked at all the zombies that you can have in the set. They all kind of stink. The zombies are just not very good. You have the best one I think is the 2 mana 2/2 where you pay 1, you sack a creature and you put a +1/+1 counter. So sure, I guess you can get that back. But then you have the 4 mana 3/4 menace creature with threshold. That's not super exciting. And so from what I've seen, just the zombies that you get back aren't particularly exciting. Now, obviously, with Zul Ashur in play, getting any zombie back and just having that trade and having that loop going is fine. But for example, there's going to be formats where this card's absolutely amazing, but I just don't know that this one necessarily is it, because you're going to have to play somewhat subpar creatures to actually get value from those creatures.
Diregraph Ghoul coming back. What do you feel about 2-mana 2/2 ward pay 2 life?
Yeah, that's the thing too. Does a 2-mana 2/2 need ward?
No.
Right? Like nobody's going to really want to kill this unless they have a zombie in the yard. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there is a little bit of upside here with if you're drafting blue-black and you can self-mill and every now and then you can get that zombie. Maybe this card's just a C.
C. I would say C for Zool. There's just enough there. Next is Abyssal Harvester. This is 1 black for a 3/2 Demon Warlock at rare. You can tap it and exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare in addition to its other type. Then exile all other nightmare creatures you control. So that kind of means that you can only have one of these going at a time.
Yeah, this card is awesome, by the way. It's very hard. Yeah, so it's very hard to cast, right? It's 1 black for a 3/2. But if you kill anything, okay, or if your creatures trade in combat, you can target either your creature or your opponent's creature, and you just get a free token.
And you just get it.
Right? You just get a creature. So this is, think about it this way, it's like 1 black for a 3/2 tap, put a creature into play.
Yeah, that's nice.
For free. And additionally, it's if a card goes into your graveyard from anywhere. So if you mill yourself, right? If you are playing the blue-black deck and you find, you play the 4-mana 2/3 flyer that becomes a 4/4 flyer with threshold, you play that and let's say you just hit a 6/6. You just put that into play off this card. So this is one of those, you have to kill it now or you might just lose, because the thing is that creature that you get, it stays in play permanently unless you make another copy, right? Meaning if you do not kill this card and this card makes something, you kill it after, you still got the value out of the card.
That's incredible. I'm a little surprised that they didn't put a clause in there that says if this guy goes away,
that's what I would have guessed.
Friend goes away. Yeah, but whatever. That makes this card a lot better. Wow. Yeah. I got to say, upon first reading, I was thinking, that seems a little tricky. But no, you're just getting cards. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, just if you trade, if you mill yourself, if you kill their creature, you just get a creature. So I think this card is going to play out pretty well. I'm going to give it like an A-.
Okay, yeah, I'm convinced, especially in black where it pairs with the removal. Next is 9 Lives Familiar. This is same casting cost, 1 black for a 1/1 cat at rare. It says this creature enters with 8 revival counters on it if you cast it. When this creature dies, if it had a revival counter on it, return it to the battlefield with 1 fewer revival counter on it at the beginning of the next end step.
So it gets an A for flavor.
Definitely.
It is a cat with 9 lives.
That is amazing.
It is great. But it is a difficult to cast 3-mana 1/1, right? Now, that 3-mana 1/1 gets to basically block forever, which is nice. But at the same time, it's just a blocker, right? You just kind of get to block forever. And I actually had this at the pre-release, and it was fine. But that's because I had a bunch of sacrifice synergies to go with this. If you just draw 9 Lives Familiar and you're playing a sacrifice deck, this is all the fodder you will ever need, right? So you have your Eaten Alives, you have your...
Totally. My God.
All the other effects. You have the 2-mana 2/1, that gets +1/+1 counters. You can have that continually grow over time. There's a lot of cool things. So I would say that if you are the sacrifice deck, this is a really fun card to have as a build-around card. But if you are playing just a normal black deck with not too many sacrifice synergies, then it's, it's not very good.
It looks like it's annoying if that's the case, which doesn't mean good. It means annoying. Like the ability to double block and get it, where there's trades happening would be nice. Chump blocking some big dumb creature a bunch of times is fine. One thing that's kind of interesting to me, I don't know, I don't think there is a combat track that gives death touch, but like just attacking with it. If they have a 4/4, they're just like, really, dude, like I have to block this dumb thing. and you have some combat trick that gives a death touch or something that I'm not thinking of. So they're like, screw it, I'll just take it. And if they do block it and you don't have it, you're like, sure, I just wasted one resource that I have 8 of, like I'm not going to go through these anyway. Those are all kind of interesting things, but none of them translate directly to like, wow, just big power.
I think this is a really great synergy card, and there are certain cards in the format that pair really well with it. Okay. And if you pick up enough of those, I could see this getting up to like maybe a B- level card where you're like, I just need, for example, I've drafted decks where I'm like, man, if I just drew Reassembling Skeleton, my deck is awesome.
Right.
This is the ultimate Reassembling Skeleton.
This is the best Reassembling Skeleton.
Right. Because you have the Zulaport Cutthroat creature, right? It's like the 2-mana 1/1, and whenever a creature dies, you drain them, right? And then you have the 2-mana 2/2, where you can sack a creature to give it a +1/+1 counter. And this is effectively a 3-mana 1/1 indestructible creature in a lot of instances.
And this goes every end step, right? So like you can sack it your turn, their turn, your turn, their turn.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. What grade did you say though? Just as a base, like a C, C-?
Yeah, I would say just if you don't have any synergies and you're just playing this as an annoying blocker, probably just because it's so hard to cast, it's probably like a C- level card.
Okay.
But then if you transition this over to a sacrifice themed deck, then I think this could get up to like a B-, possibly even a B range with enough sacrifice cards.
Stuff going on. You had good with equipment. Like there's just a bunch of random little cases. None of them are that impressive.
Right.
Next card, also the same mana cost, 1 black. This is Phyrexian Arena, an enchantment at rare. And it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. And go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was going to say there was a period in Magic where this card was awesome, right? Absolutely awesome. You're like, yes, I will do this every single time. Yes. The format's slower. I can play a bunch of cards that don't do anything, and I will win off of sheer card advantage. Even though this is a core set, I still think we live in a world where we're looking to curve out. We're still looking to play out our creatures, and there's just going to be too many instances where this card is not good. If you're on the play and you have a bunch of removal, yes. But if you're on the draw against a Boros opponent, you can never play this card.
Totally. I think the way that I would describe it, this is exactly where I was going with this too, Paul, because think about the sets that this was printed in before. And this has been printed many times, by the way, many times over the years, going back to Onslaught or something. I mean, this thing's like Apocalypse. That's what it was. I had to look it up. But, in core sets and things like that, if you look at the era that this card was printed, and the types of things that were in the sets that it was printed with for limited, there was a lot of junk. There was just a lot of not very effective, inefficient, or outright terrible cards, even at the common and uncommon slot. Go back last week and listen to our set review for the commons and uncommons, and make a little mark in your mind about how many of those are just trash, just unplayable. Would never put them in the deck. It is like 3 of them. It is almost none. Every card does something. Every D that we give now would have been a very solid C in Phyrexian Arena's era. So you have to keep that in mind, that this is not... It is no longer the time where you can just throw this in your deck and win via card advantage. That's not the case anymore. You need to support it. You don't need to do a ton, a bit of life gain, a lot of removal, a lot of cheap interactive removal, defensive speed cards. Yes, you can still build around this a bit and make it the card draw engine that it used to be, and you will win the game off of it. Drawing 2 cards a turn is just completely busted. But you do have to do a little bit of work now. Before, you could just put it in your deck, and as long as you could cast it, you were good to go. So that's the difference. I wouldn't call it a build around. It's not like you need very specific things like that. But if you just think you can have a normal deck and throw a Phyrexian Arena in it, you're going to have some extremely tough matchups, like Paul said, like against Boros and more assertive decks. So that's where I would land on it.
Yeah. I think when you're playing a card like the Arena, oftentimes people want to kind of just put it into like a control deck. And I think this is the type of card that you really want to put it in a deck with a low curve, so that you can kind of play multiple spells a turn just so you don't fall behind on board, right? If you're playing Arena with a deck with a bunch of 4 and 5 mana cards, your opponent's just going to run you over. They just clear your one blocker. You play this on turn 3. You're just taking damage every single turn. You're just helping your opponent win the game. But if you're playing a deck with a bunch of the -2/-2 card, the one black minus, let's say some burst lightnings and what have you. Yeah. Then certainly this can still be a functional card, but I think this shouldn't just be a slam. This is not a card you first pick,
right?
And this is not a card that you kind of slam dunk into your deck thinking it's going to be great. Marshall and I love things that say draw a card on them, but this one has enough of a drawback where I'm not ready to give it a high grade.
They have to realize that Paul and I are just screaming inside that we want this to just be great, and this is the solution to all of our problems. You know, when you play a lot against this card, here's the difference. They play Phyrexian Arena, you play a creature, attack them a bit, say go. They draw a card, they lose a life. They play 1 4-mana creature. You untap, kill it, attack them, and it feels like they can't win. Right. The card's a total liability, and that's it. The other end of it is very subtly different, which is that they play Phyrexian Arena, you attack them, they untap, they play a 3-drop, and they kill your 2-drop with a burst lightning. Now you feel like you can't win, right? When they double spell with Phyrexian Arena, and especially if it includes killing one of your things get real ugly real quick for you. But when they only play 1 card a turn, you can usually find a way to just kill them. So what do you want to give Phyrexian Arena?
This is tough.
Is it like a C? I mean, it's weird to just split the difference, but
it's weird because there's going to be decks where this is like a B.
Totally.
There's going to be decks where this is a D
or an
But
F.
I think if you just go, hey, on average, what will be my win rate if I just put Arena in all of my decks? It's probably like a C level card.
Probably a C. Next is Blasphemous Edict. This is 3 black for a sorcery at rare. It says you may pay black rather than pay this spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. And it says, subtle, each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. They did not need to put of their choice on here, did they?
I mean, it's a really funny card.
It is really funny, but isn't it the same card if it says each player sacrifices 13 creatures? Like it's implied.
Yeah,
that is amazing. It's a troll. Like they put that on there like, ha ha ha, like you're really going to have a choice.
You can pick.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, this is just a Wrath, right? This is 5 mana to kill things. It's going to, not often will you be able to pay the black here, but I guess if you do, it's actually really strong. Right.
Definitely.
Being able to, if there is just a board where both sides just have a bunch of creatures in play and you go Blasphemous Edict for 1 mana and follow that up with a 4-drop or a 5-drop or something, then it's pretty strong. And just a 5 mana Wrath, like I said, Day of Judgment is a pretty strong card in this format just because there's so much creature combat happening in this format. And not, you can play this just the same way, but in a color that's better for having a Wrath type effect in this. So I would say that the power level is actually comparable just because of the color that this card belongs in. So I would say Blasphemous Act is probably like an A-.
I would too. I think that even with the mana bump, what you said is true. Comparable to a card that costs a full mana less but has a similar effect is a huge compliment. I mean, that's, a full mana is a lot to make up for, but I think Blasphemous Edict will play better in black than Day of Judgment will play in white. Next is Bloodthirsty Conqueror. This is 3 black for a 5/5 Vampire Knight at Mythic Rare. It's got flying and death touch, and it says whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. And it reminds you that damage causes loss of life. It's not just cards that literally say loses life. So like when you hit them with this, you get to gain 5. That's nuts.
I mean, A+.
A+.
I mean, this is they basically just made a black Baneslayer Angel. Right. It doesn't have first strike, but it's similar. 5 mana flying death touch. You when this connects, you just gain 5 life. Also, there's an infinite combo. I'm not sure you're aware of this.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
So Bloodthirsty Conqueror, I actually have a note here. Let's see. Bloodthirsty Conqueror with Marauding Blight Priest. Okay. It's Marauding Blight Priest says, I think whenever an opponent gains life.
I think it's whenever you gain life, they lose a life.
Right. And then this one says, whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life.
Right.
So it creates this endless loop where basically if you just trigger it once, they just die.
That's
so the
awesome.
Marauding Blight Priest is not a card that you're too happy playing with because it's a 3-mana 3/2. But if I'm the Conqueror,
get in there.
It's not that bad.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, and and it's important to note here that like you play the Bloodthirsty Conqueror, and then any attacks that you happen to have are now lifelink style attacks.
Right. Absolutely.
Like even if you just could get in with 3, it's like boom, hit you for 3, gain 3. It's just going to make it so difficult for your opponent to race you. And you're just getting this ultra efficient body. I mean, the death touch is whatever, because like how often is this like blocking something bigger?
Yeah.
But still, it's a 5-mana 5/5 flying with sure we'll take it death touch. That's nuts. Definitely an A+ for Bloodthirsty Conqueror. Next is High Society Hunter. This is 3 black for a 5/3 flying vampire noble at rare. It says whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And whenever another non-token creature dies, you draw a card. Kind of interesting. So you turn this thing sideways, you sack something that you don't want very much, you get a card back, and this becomes a 6/4 flyer. It's going to end the game pretty darn quick.
Right. But also, this just triggers off of anything dying. This card is ridiculous.
Oh, what? It wasn't the sacrifice? It's just
it's
dies?
not the sacrifice. It literally just says, whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. I played this against Shuhei, actually. I got paired against him round 1 in the pre-release.
Come on.
I played this untapped, played 3 removal spells, drew 3 cards.
Are you serious?
The thing is,
and
like,
it was
if I was on the
8/6 or whatever.
And if I was on the other side, I would have been like, "Oh my gosh, what the heck?" Shuhei's just stoic the entire time. He's just like, "Yep, this is happening." Yep. I was like, "Draw a card." He's like, "Yeah, draw another card."
Yeah. You want one more?
Yeah. This card's an A. I mean, this card's the fact that just if 2 creatures trade in combat, you draw 2 cards.
That's just wild. I'm really glad you pointed that out because I would have assumed it was only from this trigger happening that you got the card.
Yeah.
Blasphemous edict.
It's in a separate line, right? I feel like that's just a different.
Oh no, it is. No, you're completely right. I just would have mentally connected the two and not realized that it was just its own static, incredibly strong static
because
ability.
What you thought the card is a reasonably strong Magic the Gathering
Quite
card.
a good one. Yeah.
Right? It's a good one.
It was going to be
this
in the
one just
B+.
takes it over the top.
Yeah, this is just easy A for High Society Hunter. Next is Painful Quandary. This is 3 black for an enchantment. It's rare. It says whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless they discard a card. So this seems terrible to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of card that I will probably never play and give it an F. And then Luis is going to come up with some weird combination of factors where he's like, actually, I put this in my deck and it was mildly playable.
And it was almost playable. I think Painful Quandary is an F. This is a classic 5-mana do nothing enchantment, right? It just doesn't do enough for your mana. It definitely could be annoying. This also, we have a section on the Sunset Show, Paul, which is card that I never win with, but it always seems to beat me. And this could be that. Like I have some slow controlling deck that can't really deal with this thing and I'll end up losing to it eventually. But on average, I think it's just going to be an F and not worth it. Next card's not quite that description. This is Liliana Dreadhorde General, 4 black for a 6 loyalty legendary planeswalker Liliana at Mythic rare. It says whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. So we got more of that going on. 3 abilities, +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. I guess that this is something that they're going towards.
Yep.
And then -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest.
Yeah,
well, Liliana's an A.
Yeah, I was like, do you want to give this an A or an A+?
Yeah, A+ is fine by me. Yeah, it actually is an A+. Yeah.
It just draws you a ton of cards for anything that trades. It has the sacrifice effect. Anytime you lose things, you draw cards. It has a gazillion loyalty and protects itself. It just does everything.
It does everything. The thing that you might overlook, I mean, you probably won't, but is you pay 6 mana, and if you're in a tough spot, especially if they have 1 or 2 really good threats, you -4 it, and you have to sacrifice 2 of your things, but you just get 2 cards back off it right away and they don't have a board. It's just dumb. So A+ for Liliana Dreadhorde General. That is one of the few cards that you can use to actually come back. Next is Runescarred Demon. This is the 5 black 6/6 flying demon at rare. And when it enters, you get to Demonic Tutor. You get to search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. That's it. There's no downside. You don't have to sack anything. You just get any card. So this is 7 mana, 6/6 flying, 2 for 1, and it's literally the best 2 for 1 you could have because you get any card out of your library.
Yep. Just again, we've had a lot of 7. There's a lot of 7 mana rares in this format for whatever reason,
and they're really
all
strong.
Powerful.
They're all
powerful.
7 mana,
right? Yeah. So, and the thing is, this is just you're locking in that extra card. It's going to be the best card in your deck. You're going to be able to fetch for. But of course, this is a 7-mana card. Certainly a card that I would be willing to play in more controlling decks, right? As kind of top end finisher. I did have this in kind of a Dimir control deck. It was decent. It was sweet. Were there games where it just sat in my hand and I couldn't do anything with it? Yes, because it costs 7 mana. But when you do cast it, oftentimes you will win the game, right? You play this, you get your removal spell or whatever. But it is very, very slow, and it's just kind of a 7 mana 6/6 flyer. I can't give it too high of a grade, I think. I think maybe somewhere like a B-, C+.
B-. Yeah, I agree. It's a good top-end finisher for a deck that has the ability to get to that stage of the game. But it's just... I know that it just happens to be right on the screen in front of me, but like when you put it up against a card like Liliana Dreadhorde General, which costs a full mana less, and as I described before, that's like somewhere around 2 to 2.5 turns sooner, Liliana is just better. Like not just for the mana cost, it's also just would be better if it was 7 mana. So that's how you get up into the AA+ range. Runescarred Demon is like a B-. Like it is a fine top-end finisher for a control deck.
Yep.
Last is Rise of the Dark Realms. This is 7 black. I guess I could keep reading. It's a sorcery, mythic rare. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. This is another pie in the sky, build around, screenshot it, send it to me and Luis, type card. But it's 9 mana. There's no cost reduction on it, and you just can't put 9 mana cards in your deck and expect to win games of Magic. So it's an F, but expect me to send you a screenshot of me having cast this and won the game at some point.
Yeah, it's definitely an F where people go, actually, check this out.
Even Luis, I don't think will have a...
I don't... Every card is in his range, so I will...
That's true. and to be fair to it, there are cards, like that's a card that you could bring in out of the sideboard against some matchups.
Absolutely.
Right? It's just not a card you want to actually play regularly. Okay, that moves us to the gold cards. First one up is called Kaikar Zephyr Awakener. It is 2 blue-white for a 3/4 flying legendary bird wizard at rare. And it says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, that isn't where I thought this card was going. Choose one. You can make a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, or you can exile another target creature you control and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you can blink a creature, or you can make a 1/1 flyer for each time you cast a non-creature spell. A little bit weird, right? Just like, why do we care about non-creature spells for a blue-white card? But who cares? This card's awesome, right? 4 mana, 3/4 flying that spits out 1/1s or blinks if for some reason that's a better value to you. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I would have expected this to be like a blue-red card or something because it keys off of non-creature spells, but it's just excellent flyer, excellent body, makes tokens. I mean, this card is just awesome.
I would give it an A. I would give Kaikar an A. Yeah, just a straight up, that's an A. Next is Consuming Aberration. This is 3 blue-black for a star horror. It is rare. It says its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. Another kind of weird interaction with the Threshold deck. Whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, then puts those cards in into their graveyard. So is this a mill win condition? Because as a 5 mana, it gets really huge. I'm not that keen on it. But if I get to mill my opponent just by casting spells and have a big fat blocker to help me do it, or maybe even a finisher, maybe I'm interested. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, that's the thing. There are matchups where this card is amazing, where let's say you're playing the Dimir mirror, and you play this, and it'll naturally just be a large creature. But the thing is, if you're playing against kind of a more aggressive deck, when you play this on turn 5, maybe it'll just be a 2/2, right? And you just won't have a follow-up creature. And so I don't like this card for that reason, because this is a highly matchup dependent card where if you play against slower decks, this card's going to be a legitimate way to win by not only attacking your opponent, but possibly even decking them. But then the first couple of mills, if you're playing against a mirror, you will give them threshold. And then also when you're playing against the various Boros or green-white decks, this card just won't have an impact on the board the turn that you cast it. So I don't really like this card very much.
I don't either.
See?
I mean, and Threshold only cares about your graveyard, right?
Right. So you're helping them.
So you're
right?
just straight up helping them, and you're not doing anything. You're not milling your own flashback cards. You're not getting yourself to Threshold. That feels like a miss for this card.
Yeah.
It is an interesting card. I agree.
It can be huge, though. I had
a game. It can be very large.
I boarded this in against kind of a slower Simic deck in the pre-release, and I did play it. It was like a 7/7, and then I just decked my opponent. So there are instances where this card can be good, but the floor is also really low. So I just don't think you can give this too high of a grade.
So what do you think? Like C? Is that what you said?
Yeah, something like a C. I just don't take it. You see like a Dimir colored rare and you get excited, but this is no Kaikar.
Right. Next is Alesha, Who Laughs at Fate. This is 1 black-red for a 2/2 legendary human warrior rare with first strike. And whenever Alesha attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then it has Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, return target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it has first strike.
Yeah. So this card's just obnoxious. Like even if you ignore the Raid part, a 3-mana 2/2 first striker that when it attacks is a 3/3 first striker, then becomes a 4/4 first striker.
You can see how
if you have
this
any
goes.
tricks or instant speed removal spells, it's just it's ridiculous. And then on top of that, it's got the Raid ability.
Wow.
Right? So let's say you just have a 2-drop in your graveyard, you attack with something else, you play the Alicia, and you get the 2-drop from your graveyard back into play.
Dang.
Right? She doesn't even need to attack. Something else could attack. So this card not only gives you value, it's just an excellent aggressive creature to play on turn 3. Is this card an A?
Yeah, I think it's an A for Alesha. The fact that you don't have to even risk her in combat, pushes it over the top. That's incredible. And what a threat. Next is Ashroot Animist. This is 2 green-red for a 4/4 lizard druid at rare. It's got trample, and it says, when this creature attacks, another target creature you control gains trample and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X, is this creature's power?
It's like overrun the creature.
And this is already a 4/4 trampler? Dang.
Yeah, so the floor, if you want to call it a floor, is this is a 4-mana 4/4 trampler that when it attacks, it gives something else +4/+4 and trample.
That's incredible.
Right. So your opponent has to block the Animist and kill it in some way. If they don't, they're just going to lose.
They're going to lose in 2 attacks.
You just get 2 attacks off of this, and that's just going to be way too much. But the question is, if your opponent can somehow survive that attack, then you're just able to get in for a good chunk of damage, right? But of course, this also works really well with Giant Growth.
Oh my God. You mean a main phase Giant Growth?
Right, just the main phase Giant Growth, attack for 7, and then give something else +7/+7 and trample until end of turn can also get the job done. Now, despite all of that, it is a 4-mana 4/4 trample, right? And when it comes into play, it doesn't do anything like the Alicia or whatever, right? But if you do get to attack, this thing hits really, really hard. I don't think I can quite put it at the same level as maybe the other 2 cards, but it's really good. I'd give this like an A-.
I would too. I would say A-. This is a premium threat. This is a must kill. Next is Anthem of Champions. This is green-white for an enchantment, and it's rare. Beautiful design here. Creatures you control get +1/+1. This feels like what this card should be in the modern era.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Is it good is the question. And the answer is, yeah, these cards play really well.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a card that green-white is also the color combination that's looking to go wide, right? Mm-hmm. You put some tokens into play. This card's really, really solid. You're never going to cut it. I think it's very strong. I don't know I don't know if I can I might not be able to get it to the A range, but it's certainly around there. I would give it like a B plus.
I would too. I'd give it a build around B plus, and it's an easy build around. It's just put enough creatures in your deck. That's it. Elenda, Saint of Dusk is next. This is 2 white-black for a 4/4 legendary vampire knight at rare. It has lifelink, and this is kind of cute. It has hexproof from instants, which are usually the better removal spells. And it says, as long as your life total is greater than your starting life total, Elenda gets +1/+1 and has menace. Elenda gets an additional +5/+5 as long as your life total is at least 10 greater than your starting life total. That's a nice card. Dang.
Yeah, so that's not going to happen for the most part. If you're, I would guess that you're unlikely to get to 30 life, but there are going to be instances where, you just kind of curve out, and let's say you just randomly play the 3-mana 2/3 Angel or a Healer's Hawk, and then you play this and you're just at 21, right? And all of a sudden this thing is a 5/5 with Menace, with lifelink. And lifelink is precisely the type of keyword that you want on just a random 4/4. And the fact that you can't kill it with Hero's Downfall is pretty relevant. Or Burst Lightning, you can't kill it. You can't shrink it in combat with the Disfigure, the -2/-2 effect. So this card's just a really, really solid body. It doesn't do anything in terms of, a lot of the other cards kind of have flashy effects. And a lot of times you're going to be probably under 20 life, right? Or not at 21 life. So you're still looking at this as a 4-mana 4/4 lifelink, but it's got upside. So I don't know. Is this like a B plus?
I think it's a B plus. I wanted to get to A- because I really like big lifelink creatures to stabilize boards where you're behind. This could be an amazing top deck, even in a game that you're behind. But it is ultimately kind of just that. The hexproof from instance is like so close to getting it over the line, but I would say B plus for Elenda. Next is Niv Mizzet Visionary. This is 4 blue-red for a 5/5 flying legendary creature, dragon, wizard, mythic rare. So we have a 6/6 5/5 flying legendary dragon at mythic. This thing better be great. It says you have no maximum hand size. Are they just going to get rid of that rule at some point? I mean, that doesn't really matter. It says whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. So if you bolt them, you draw 3.
God, I was so disappointed when I opened this card. I was just like, Niv Mizzet is the original Niv Mizzet is one of my favorite cards. I actually qualified for US Nationals playing a Niv Mizzet control deck.
Okay.
And so when I read this card, I was like, please be good. And it's just not.
It's like, it's still a 6/6 or 6-mana 5/5 flying. Like, how do you...
But it's just that line of text is almost not a line of text where, yes, if you have specifically Burst Lightning, right? Burst Lightning is the most common way to draw cards. And if you live that dream, it's fine. But just in most instances, this is a 6-mana 5/5 flyer. In most instances, this is even worse than a Shivan Dragon, right? Because it just doesn't
have fire breathing.
So I like a C plus.
I mean, there's a few other things, there's the 2/1 that pings them when you play it, that turns into a draw card. Like,
is there like a Lobber Crew? Is there a tap, deal 1 damage to something?
Not tap, but it triggers off of instants and sorcery. Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
I can't get this to B. I don't think I can get this to B level.
I think I would give it a build around B-.
Okay.
Like if you have the things, if you have 2 burst lightnings and a firebrand, like this is still ultimately a 6-mana 5/5 flyer. That is good. That is powerful. That is hard to deal with. But the rest of the text is so close. It just rounds to 0. And that's really disappointing.
Yeah.
Next is 1,000-Year Storm. This is 4 blue-red also. This one's an enchantment. It doesn't do anything when you cast it. It's a rare. And it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast before it. This turn, you may choose new targets for the copy. I'm just going to say F for 1,000-Year Storm.
Yep.
Even in the aspirational build-arounds that we've been talking about, where we kind of recognize that they're not very good, but you could do it. This is bad even by those standards because you have to do it all in one turn.
At least with the red enchantment, you're getting dragons.
Right.
This one just copies a card draw spell. What are we talking about?
It never actually works. This is the type of card that's built for true storm decks that can have like an arbitrarily large amount of mana and cards available, and you can't really do that unlimited. So F for Thousand Year Storm. Next is Lathril, Blade of the Elves. That sounds like it's from Lord of the Rings, kind of. This is 2 black-green for a 2/3 legendary elf noble at rare. Menace. Okay, I was thinking Reach, but we'll go with Menace. Whenever Lathril deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green elf warrior tokens. Okay, that's business. And then you can tap Lathril and tap 10 untapped elves you control as well. And each opponent loses 10 life and you gain 10 life. Whatever. Boy, 4 mana, 2/3 Menace but nothing else really. Like, this thing does have to get through. I'm actually kind of down on Lathril here. Is this thing actually connecting at any point?
I think this card's just bad. I wanted it to be good. It looked exciting. I think this is probably more of something that you play in Constructed or something, maybe like some kind of elf deck, but there's just not enough elves to kind of do the tap 10 untapped elves thing unless this connects. And there's no special way to get this to even connect. It's a 4 mana, 2/3 Menace. How is this ever getting through?
It's never getting through.
You just double block this thing and they can't do anything about it. So I just don't feel like this card's going to be good.
Seems bad.
I just give it a D.
I'll give it a D. Lathril gets a D. It needed to be 3 mana, and then it's probably too good, so they kind of got caught there. Next is
that would be interesting.
Swiftblade Vindicator is next. This is red-white for a 1/1 human soldier at rare. It's got double strike, it's got vigilance, and it's got trample.
It's the best 2 mana 2/1 ever.
It kind of is. Yeah. Basically, this is a type of card that at face value underperforms a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. But if you can do anything to its power, just get a counter on it, it's good. It performs. Combat tricks, it's good. +1/+1 counters, equipment, anything that augments this takes it from being like, to being like, okay. And if you can do, if you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, the card's just dumb. Like, it just gets out of hand quick. So the question is, do we think that if you put this into the average red-white deck, that you will have enough opportunity to pump it in different ways and make it good?
I think the answer is yes. I think the red-white deck, the red-white deck's just looking to beat down. This is just an awesome 2 mana play. There's a number of great combat tricks to go with this. And the card, the keyword that, obviously double strike's the best part, but the keyword that really puts it over the top is also the trample, right? Because if you just attack with this and they get kind of low and then you just have a sure strike in your hand or something, you just get in for eight points of trampling double striking damage. Not only that, you have the white combat trick, which saves this and also puts a +1/+1 counter on it for 1 mana. And then you have the Felidar Cat, the 4-drop that also puts a counter. That's also a good card to put into your deck.
Am I allowed to dream and mention the rare equipment too?
I was actually thinking about that, Marshall, but I didn't.
I don't want to be greedy. That was
just too rare.
Yeah. No, I agree. This card I think will perform very well. I think that you have enough opportunities. And then if you happen to know that you have it early, like if you pick it up in the first pack, pick up a couple of extra things that can help it along the way. It just doesn't need much. And honestly, too, another thing is if you play this on turn 2, people kill this. Like, even if you look at your hand and you have no way to make it good and they have a 2/2 and it just would have traded or whatever, they'll be like, kill that, because they don't like this card's scary. I would say B for Swiftblade Vindicator. I just have faith that it belongs in the deck enough to get the job done.
Agreed.
Next is Zimone Paradox Sculptor. This is 2 blue-green for a 1/4 legendary human wizard at Mythic rare. It says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. Really? Okay. And then you can play blue-green and tap it, and it says double the number of each kind of counter on up to 2 target creatures and or artifacts you control. Wow.
This is just
so you just curve into this?
I guess they're just determined to make Zimone just busted in every format.
No
because
kidding.
The last one was an A, and this one's also an A. It's a 4 mana 1/4. You can target itself too, right?
What?
So it's a 4 mana 2/5.
God, you're right.
So it's 3 power and 6 toughness for 4 mana, which is fine. But then you can put it onto other creatures to attack with immediately, and then you untap. and then on the following turn, that's 2 more counters, and then you double those counters.
What? That's crazy.
That's ridiculous. We're talking about 4 power and 4 toughness being added on turn 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first 2 were 2 creatures that could attack right away. Yeah, that's an A. Zimon's an A.
So good.
That's amazing. Next is Coma World Eater. This is 3 green, green, blue, blue. That is a very tough mana cost, 7 mana and double. But it is an 8/12. It's a legendary creature serpent. It's just a regular rare. It can't be countered. It has trample. So you get a 7 mana, 8/12 trample. It does have ward 4. And it kind of needs to, because by the time this thing comes down, ward 2 doesn't really do that much, but ward 4 still does. And then it says, whenever Coma deals combat damage to a player, which it should be able to do very easily with trample, you create 4 3/3 blue serpent creature tokens named Coma's Coil. Wow. Well, that's worth your 7 mana.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of stats. It's pretty hard to kill. Although I guess by the time you cast this, they will also have. It's just going to tap them out, right? They're probably going to have the mana to also kill this, but it's just gonna tap them out. But I
if
mean,
they have a 5 mana removal spell, this is only 7, and you may even get it out with the Llanowar Elf or something. Like they may not be able to kill it, and there's not a lot of 2 or 3 mana removals that kills an 8/12.
Yeah, that's the thing. One of the cleanest answers is bake into a pie, but that costs 8 mana. Right. And if you're on the draw, that's just not enough.
No. And if you missed a land drop, or if this is ramped out, and remember, this needs to connect once.
Right. And I mean, this is the payoff card. If you want to kind of play Simic and ramp into this card seems pretty nice, hard to cast, but once it's in play, you have to imagine it's going to get through. And the thing is, how do you even block this thing? It has 12 toughness.
No way you're blocking it. And you have to put at least 8 toughness in front to prevent the serpents from joining the fray. No, this card looks awesome. I mean, and it's blue-green. Like blue-green is rampy. It does do ramp stuff, and mana fixing is a feature of blue-green as well. So I actually really like Coma for the deck. This is a card that if it was in any other color pair, maybe green-red would be the other it could fit. But anything beyond that, it would be like, this is so hard to cast. And are you ever really going to... Here, it's like, no, I can see it. Like, this is going to hit the battlefield. And this is where, can't be countered in Ward 4, protect your investment, of I'm going to put all my eggs into this Coma basket. And I think it will win you the game. I'm going to say B+ for Coma World Eater. It still does have a very steep and difficult mana cost that has to be considered, but I think it actually pays you back for it.
Yeah, I think it's a great payoff card. Another awesome 7 mana play. Yes. There's a lot of those in this format. They all kind of win you the game, but you just kind of have to craft your game plan around it. But of course, Simic is one of the best colors at being able to do that. Right. So I think B+ is reasonable here for Coma.
Muldrotha, the Gravetide is back. This is a awesome card. This is 3 black, blue, green, my favorite color trio. It's a 6/6 legendary elemental avatar at Mythic rare. It says during each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. This is a type of card that basically, if you can cast it, you play it. If it survives, then you kind of win the game, is how it normally plays out in these decks. I would be worried here. It's one thing to cast Coma World Eater in a 2-color deck. It's not a huge stretch to be able to splash into black for Muldrotha. It's also a mana less. But splashing does carry with it some toughness. It's difficult. And, you probably play land number 6, play this. You probably can't play anything out of your yard. You need to untap. It is just a big dumb 6/6.
Yeah. I mean, there's a pretty big. You have to craft your mana to be able to play this. Assuming you did that, which means you just need to have the right sources. Then you need to make sure that you can have a decent sized graveyard to actually be able to get value from this. That won't always be the case. You won't always be able to get great things back into play from the graveyard. You can kind of maybe even compare this to the Atali that we've seen previously, but I do think this is worse than the Atali. Atali is obviously easier to cast, and then Atali gets you get you 2 looks. And with this one, it's harder to cast, and you won't, like I said, sometimes you're just not have enough in your graveyard to actually have this pay you off, unless you're self-milling yourself or doing some looting effects, something of that nature, because of course this doesn't return. You can't just get removal spells from the graveyard from this. They have to be permanent cards.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty cool card. If I was maybe a blue-green deck or a green-black deck and I had some mana fixing, some evolving wilds, and some maybe a dismal backwater, I'd certainly play this card, but I don't think it's kind of on the same level as the others. And because you have to build around it, probably kind of like a B level card.
B. I'd give it a B. And it needs to be in a deck like you described. Next, maybe this is one of my favorite artworks of all. It's Progenitus. It's just such a sick, it looks so, anyway, it's unplayable, but I'll read it just for fun. It's white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green. It is a 10/10 legendary Hydra avatar at Mythic. It has protection from everything. That's literally the rules text on the card. And it says, if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it instead. It's an F. It's really cool. We'll move on to the next card. You just can't cast it, and you can't reanimate it. So next is Scrawling Crawler, which is 3 mana for a 3/2 artifact creature. It's a Phyrexian construct at rare. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. Oh, I always hate those things. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. Okay, that helps a little bit. And it is your upkeep. So there's this major issue with these type of cards where your opponent gets first crack at having the extra card. And that's not the case here.
Yeah. So that is a massive, like a massive difference with the Scrawling Crawler. Being able to be the first person to utilize that extra card is huge. And additionally, when you play this, that second line of text is not irrelevant either.
No,
right?
that does break
You're
parity.
actually hitting them pretty hard. You play this on turn 3. Your opponent takes 1, and then you get, if they don't kill it right away, you both draw a card, they take another one. And if they don't remove this is just getting in for an extra free 4, 5, 6 points of damage. So if you're playing kind of an aggressive deck and you just play this plays out much better than you would expect, because I agree with I hate Howling Mind effects, but this is a Howling Mind effect where you're the first person to use the card and that second line of text. I think the combination of all those things actually makes this good.
I think so too. You convinced me, dude. That's 2 damage every turn, no matter what.
Exactly. Imagine this in a Boros deck. You just 2-drop, play Crawler on turn 3, and if they don't kill it, and you just don't attack with it, it's just kind of like a sulfuric vortex, a one-sided vortex.
Yeah.
You're drawing a bunch of cards, you're beating them down. So I actually think Crawler could be like a B-level card.
Definitely, especially in an aggressive deck, because you can utilize those cards with cheaper, you're flooding the board where your opponent's drawing a 5-drop and a land that they're stuck on both. Huh. Scrawling Crawler, B, maybe even better. I mean, that card looks really good for aggressive decks. Next is Leyline Axe. This is 4 mana for an artifact equipment. It's rare. Equip cost is 3. What do you get? It says if this card is in your opening hand, really? It's actually a Leyline?
It's Leyline Axe. It better be.
I was kind of hoping, but then I'm like, they wouldn't do that on equipment, but they did. You may begin the game with it on the battlefield, so you get to just play it for free if it's in your opener. And then an equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has, it has double strike and trample. Dude.
I mean, that ends the game, right?
Anything's a threat at that point.
Yeah, anything is a threat at that point, but the cost is so high.
It's absurd.
You have to pay 7 mana.
Yeah.
And I, because ley lines have historically just been unplayable and limited, I don't know how to value this one, because this one looks like it could be playable, because if this is in your opening hand, I think this card is decent if you're aggressive.
It's just only decent though. I think I would give it an F. I know it's aggressive to do that, but I'm kind of trying to say don't fall for the trap, I guess. I think this card's a trap, because I think every single game that you draw this and it's not in your opening hand, you're just going to be throwing up. You're just like, why did I do this? It's such
Embercleave, but you're paying for all of it.
All of it, and it's up front. There's no surprise factor. You can't make it cheaper. I mean, come on. We've all played a game where you go Leyline Axe or similar, and they're like, okay. And then you're like, next turn, you're like, equip, and they go kill your creature. and you're just like, I can't win anymore. Like, it is not a common occurrence to have a game where you're like equip 3ing multiple times. So
Marshall, have you considered just drawing this every game?
I'm going to say F for Leyline Axe. I agree with you. I think it's okay. It would be like a C+ if you did have it in your opener. If you just got to start with it and you only had to pay the 3, it might even be better than that.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to give it a little bit more hope, but I don't think it's good either. I'll give it like a D.
You gave it a Leyline of Hope?
I'll give it a Leyline of Hope. I will probably try it out in my bad Trainwreck Boros decks and just, the worse your deck is, the higher the chance this makes it into your deck.
I mean, these things do get kind of good when you open, and and I'm just trying to like not fall for the trap.
Yeah, that's fair.
It probably is a D. Next is Solemn Simulacrum. Oh my God, I love this card.
Love this card.
4 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature golem. It's rare. And when it enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. And when this thing dies, you draw a card, or you may draw a card.
B+?
Yeah, definitely. Pure value.
Every
it's just
deck.
So good. There's just like really no decks that don't want Solemn. And it goes particularly well in the decks that are playing these 7-drops that we were talking about. The 6s and 7s benefit from this card so much. So yeah, B+ for Solemn Simulacrum. Next is Banner of Kinship. This is 5 mana for an artifact at rare. It says, as this artifact enters, choose a creature type. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact.
So it's kind of like it's kind of playing into, there's an older card, it's called Coat of Arms.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of in that style of effect. But the problem is, in this format, it's just kind of hard to get a purely tribal deck.
I don't think you can do it.
It's just. I think this is kind of a card that you may be interested in building around and constructed or something. But I just don't see too many instances where you get to just completely go off with this. I would say that cats and elves are going to be maybe some of the more common namings here, and you're going to need to cast this and have 3 at least of that type in play for this card to even be reasonable.
And they have to be in play when this enters the battlefield.
There's just too much.
It just doesn't do anything if you don't have any creatures, you can't cast this and then, but in the future my creatures are going to be good. Like, it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I think this is just an F.
F. Build around F. The rare build around F. Next is Sire of 7 Deaths, which is 7 mana 7/7. This is episode 777 of the podcast. Interesting.
7 abilities.
Yeah, it's a Eldrazi. Oh, it's a mythic rare. It has First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, and Ward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the ward is pay 7 life.
And also, this is the only Eldrazi, right? And Eldrazi has 7 letters in it. There's just too many things. Yeah.
So this is a meme, but also is it good?
I think so, right? I mean, you play this.
It has lifelink, first strike.
It's got reach, first strike,
vigilance.
Basically, if they don't kill this, if your opponents can't kill this, and even if they do, they have to take 7. But if they don't kill this, how are you ever attacking through this thing?
Yeah, you're never doing it. And you're never winning the game if it's on the battlefield. No way.
Just completely brick walls the board. It's got menace too. You have to double block this. I mean, it just kind of has all the keywords that you want. So I do think this card is pretty nice if you can draft your deck to be able to play this card. Cost 7 though.
I think that's the only thing, is that it costs 7, but for my mana, this is an A. This is a maybe an A+. Like, seriously, because
right.
Like, there is no plausible scenario that you could die after casting this unless this creature gets killed. No way. It has lifelink and reach.
Yeah. This basically kind of has the Baneslayer effect. Right?
Totally.
It's a 7 mana kind of a Baneslayer. Now, like I said, just again, it does cost 7. But the thing is, when you play this, you have completely stabilized the board.
Yes.
Right? If your opponents don't kill this, they just lose. So
do I want to give it an A- for the 7? I think
that's what I'm thinking.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an A.
Okay.
And my reasoning is it would normally be an A+, but the mana is high at 7. But I'm not going to go to A- because it's colorless. Like you can just throw this into any deck that is capable of getting to 7 mana. And once you get there, no matter what, like this isn't Coma where it's like, oh, I got to 7 mana, but I'm a blue short. This is 7 mana, play it. Done. It's on the battlefield.
Also, Coma doesn't stabilize you the way this card does.
Totally. This is better than that.
You play Coma and then your opponents just attack you with 4 creatures and you die.
Right.
You play Sire of 7 Deaths, they just can't do anything.
Unless they
kill this.
Remove it. Must remove it.
The
only thing that would be better and that plays a little bit better is if these things are spread out over a few creatures. You know, this is where, like in the last set, Overlord of the Mistmoors, right? Like even if they kill it, you have these blockers, so it's really, really almost impossible to die. This is killable, but still, I would say A for Sire of 7 Deaths. Last regular card is Soulstone Sanctuary. It's the only land. It's rare, it taps for colorless, and you can pay 4 mana and have the land become a 3/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types, and it's still a land, so it's kind of a super mutavault.
It is a super mutavault, but man, I like casting my spells, Marshall.
I do too.
And so having a land in your deck that taps for colorless, if I do take something like this, I will definitely put a higher priority on cards like Evolving Wilds or the tap lands that generate multiple colors. There's a lot of commons in this set that have double blue, double black, double red in their casting costs. So playing something like the Sanctuary can be a pretty big cost, depending on your deck. At the same time, though, it is a utility land, right? So this still gives you that value there where, hey, I mean, if you have a couple of tap lands and you play this as your 17th mana source and you have slight tribal synergies, even if you don't, I mean, this is still something where you can cash in your land for value. So I think this card's going to be fine. At least me personally, other people will take this card just higher than me. Just because I'm just going to take spells and I'm going to take I just don't want to take colorless lands in general. So I will probably not take this that highly. I'm going to give this a C, but maybe it's better.
Yeah. My guess is that it plays at the C+ level. You mentioned everything you said is right. And the key here is that this is a legitimate utility land. Like this becomes a land you can trade off for a creature or that you can use to beat your opponent down. The bar is high for that. I really shy away from any of the stupid temporary effects or the dumb stuff that I never play those. This one is actually like catching my eye, and I'm the same way. I never play these, these colorless utility lands, but this one would actually probably make the cut in the scenarios that you described. So I would say C+ for Soulstone Sanctuary, but I'm also aligned with you that I'm a little skeptical of those. Okay, we've got 10 special guests. I'm going to kind of cruise through these. These show up so infrequently. It's more just like we want to give you the warning on if one of these is just totally garbage or totally great rather than some deep dive. So the first one is Condemn. It's white for an instant. It says put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness. It's just a fine removal spell.
B?
C, B, whatever.
C+, I don't know.
Yeah, C+. Next is Sphinxes Tutelage. This is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. It says whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. If 2 non-land cards that share a color were milled this way, repeat the process. And then it has the activated ability of 5 and a blue, draw a card and then discard a card. Do you consider that in the format that this was in, it was its own win condition? Do you still consider it that if you happen to open one of these here?
I just think the format's a little too fast now for that kind of stuff. I think in previous core sets, the formats were pretty slow and milling them was a legitimate victory condition. But now just like 3 mana to play an enchantment with a lot of even in core set, there's just a lot of good aggressive color combinations. I wouldn't lean into something like this. Yeah,
it's also worth noting that in the set it was in, which was Origins, it was an uncommon there. So like you could even get multiples of these and kind of pop off. I agree with you, Paul. I think you could do a build around on this and it might be interesting, but you would really need to have this kind of fall into your lap to make it work. Build around C or something like that. Next is Grim Tutor, 1 black sorcery. Search your library for a card, put that card in your hand, and then shuffle. You lose 3 life. That's an F. Next one is not. This is Embercleave. So 4 red. This is so nasty that this is in the set in this level. Like, do I actually have to play around Embercleave at any point? I'm going to refuse to do so, but it is 4 red for a legendary artifact equipment. It's got flash. It costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature you control. When it enters, you get to attach it to a target creature you control for free, and the creature gets +1/+1, has double strike and trample. It does have an equip cost of 3. This card's a bomb. It's an amazing card. It is super annoying that it technically exists in this set, but isn't really a thing. I'd love to see a high level event where somebody actually is forced to play around Embercleave as like the one out, that could beat them or whatever. But make no mistake, this card's amazing. Like this is it an A? Whatever. It's probably an A- or a B+ or something.
It's up there. I mean, imagine if Leyline Axe was just cheaper and also you can use it as a trick.
Right. So, that lets you win combat and kill your opponent out of nowhere. So B+, A-, something for Embercleave. That is a card that you do have to actually be aware of. Next is Goblin Bushwhacker. This is red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior. And it says when it enters, if it was kicker cost is red. So that brings its cost to double red. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. And that does count itself as well. Not a card I think you need to pay a super amount of attention, but it's a playable.
Yeah, it's fine. If you're like an aggro deck, fine. But I still think it's kind of like a C level card.
C+ or something. Yeah, Bloom Tender is 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid. It taps for each color among permanents you control, you add 1 mana of that color. So in limited, for the most part, it adds 1 or sometimes 2 mana.
Yeah, I mean, if this can add you 2 mana, that is quite strong.
It is good. It is good.
If you can do that. So I mean, I think this card is pretty decent. You're going to obviously be a 2-color deck anyway. So you play this, turn 3, play something. Turn 4, you can play a 6-drop. So probably like a B- level card.
I agree. I think the same thing. It is good. Yeah. Next is Paradise Druid. Similar. It's 1 and a green for a 2/1. And by the way, these are both elves, just for what it's worth. The Bloom Tender and Paradise Druid. This creature has hexproof as long as it's untapped. So they can't just untap and kill it, which is really nice. This one taps to add 1 mana of any color.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I actually it's really good. I kind of like the Bloom Tender a little more just for the upside of the 2 mana. I think that's huge,
especially for our C+. Yeah, C+ for Paradise Druid. Next is Akroma's Memorial. This is we love our 7s. This is a 7 mana legendary artifact, and it says creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red. Is this good?
I think this card is good. If you have creatures in play,
it just doesn't add any power, right?
It doesn't. So yeah, the important thing here is to have creatures in play. Mm-hmm. But let's just say you had 3 creatures in play. Then all of a sudden your opponents can't even attack you because just everything has first strike.
Right.
So it's kind of like, it kind of has that sire effect of the 7s where you play it, but it does have a little additional setup cost because you need to have the creatures in play, but immediately they have flying. So I do think this is kind of like an overrun style card. Mm-hmm. And if you can resolve it in the right deck where you can ramp into it and have some creatures, I do think it can be pretty nice. I don't think it's as good as Sire, but I think this can be like a B-level card.
This is no, that makes sense. If you have 4 or 5 power total of creatures, Akroma's Memorial is probably worth it. And if you have anything above that, and I'm just talking about on the battlefield at any given time, it does, of course, let your opponent leverage their removal spells in a pretty meaningful way, etc. But this asks a very large question. Also, it's difficult to get rid of. It's an artifact. Last 2 cards, Temporal Manipulation. This is 3 blue for a sorcery. It says take an extra turn after this one. This is a time warp reprint thing, or I think it's from Portal or whatever. But is it good? It's good, right? Good.
It's fine. I haven't played too many formats where I got to cast Time Walks, but certainly having an extra attack step, draw a card, all that stuff. There are instances where you just don't have anything going on, right? Where you just play this and you just draw an extra card, and those are, that's the floor of the card, and that can be pretty bad. But in the instance where you can kind of take advantage of this, get that extra attack trigger, attack step, and do extra stuff with your mana, it's fine. I don't know that this card's super. Like, what do you think about this card?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that it probably works well with the blue-red deck. Like, you get the triggers for free, effectively. So anything that you're doing, you're just getting a bunch of stuff. But that still doesn't blow me away.
Yeah.
These type of cards, really, you want repeatable onboard effects to truly maximize on. You can steal a game every once in a while by getting 2 attack steps in or something. If I'm blue, I'm playing it. Like, I just think you're going to get to 5 mana most games, and at that point it becomes effectively free. People don't play that many counters. It's very low risk. So I would play Temporal Manipulation, but I'd probably have it at the like C plus B minus range, something like that.
Yeah, I kind of like it, and I think I would like it in blue-white flyers, right?
Yeah,
because
that's a good example.
You get to definitely get your attacks in that way, and then take another turn.
And one attack step is usually the difference on flyers. It's usually a close race. Last card is Fiend Artisan. This is a little tricky. So it is either black, green, or green, black. You can choose any combination of those 2 mana. It's a nightmare. It's a 1/1. And it says this creature gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. And you can pay X and a black or X and a green and tap it and sacrifice another creature. And if you do that, you can search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. And you can only do that at sorcery speed.
Yeah, so you really want to kind of play this in a black-green deck just because it's kind of hard to cast otherwise.
Right, it's like free in black-green and then difficult everywhere else.
Right. And the thing is, I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of turbo milling happening in this format. There's not a ton. I guess in blue-black you're doing it, but if you can kind of find enough ways to put things into the graveyard and tutor some stuff out, this has decent utility, but initially, if you play this on turn 2, it's not that great of a body either. You need to have some good creatures to search out. It's a pretty big setup cost as well. You need to have another creature in play as well. So, I mean, if I'm black-green, I'm probably playing this, but it's really hard to actually figure out how good it's going to be. A lot of it just kind of depends on what you have in your deck.
Yeah, the utility of the searching up thing is just enough. It's clunky, it's expensive at sorcery speed. It needs to survive. You have to have another creature. There's a lot that needs to happen there, but it's enough worth it that, like, if you can make your Fiend Artisan a 2/2 or a 3/3, it's good. It's just that it only goes in the one deck and it's fine. It probably plays at like the B- level or something like that. And if the game goes long and they don't kill it and you do a little bit of sacrificing, it can be a 4/4 and you can go search up your best thing and it can actually be pretty good. Wow. What a set. Okay, we're back in the core set range for sure. Stuff that stood out, lots of very powerful rares. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a format that the rares were quite important in. Also, the 7s, like, interesting just to note, like in a week or so, we'll know how fast this format is and if these 7s don't bother, or if they're like, no, when you get there, you can win, because there was a number of them that catch you right back up again. And then I do really appreciate that at the rare slot here that they use some of these for those aspirational build arounds to give us something to do, especially in a core set when it gets a little, kind of, I've seen what's here, after, 20 or 30 drafts or whatever, when we kind of figure out the format. Great stuff, Paul. Thanks for joining me. You'll be back again next week and for the foreseeable future until Luis decides he wants to come back to us. But thanks for taking the time to join us. Where can people find your stuff?
So the vast majority of the content that I make is on my YouTube channel, which is going to be youtube.com/@haumph, HAUMPH. And so there I just post daily draft content. So if you want to see more Foundations limited content, well, I post a video there every day, 8 a.m. Pacific.
And you already have some up there now, right?
Yeah. I have a couple of draft videos up already. I have a few more. I have to record a bunch because I'm going to a wedding this weekend. So there's a bunch in the queue there. So yeah, tons of Foundation stuff. I always focus on the most recent set at hand. And, I have a small side goal of trying to hit rank 1. And we'll see if we can get there this time around.
You mean if you can get there again?
Right.
Because you did that numerous times in Duskmorn and for quite a long stretch. I'll put a link to Paul's YouTube channel in the show notes as well. So if you want to check it out, you can get over there. It's honestly some of the best limited content that you can watch. Entertaining and insightful, really great stuff. Couldn't recommend it higher. And again, I'll put a link down to that. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Paul is Haumph pretty much everywhere. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com, including last week's episode with the commons and uncommons that complements this one. You can visit our sponsor, Ultimate Guard, ultimateguard.com at either their website. And then that's to check out their products. If you want to buy something, you can go to your favorite online retailer or your favorite local game store. Thanks again to everybody who supports us on Patreon. We really appreciate it, and it keeps the show going. So thank you for that. That is going to do it for this one. We'll be back with our format overview for Foundations next week. Okay, Paul, I'm going to take the sign off here.
All
It's
right.
obviously going to be food related. I'm probably going to put you on the spot next week for like Vegas food recommendations or something like that. But for this week, I wanted to know, I know that you cook at home a fair bit. You're not the like, I'm going to get out the smoker thing like Luis does where he's going deep. What is your go-to breakfast? Like, what do you like to have in the morning?
I basically have this almost the same thing every single morning for breakfast. Basically, it's 3 eggs, 3 full eggs, 1 egg white, so 4 eggs, and then I'll have 3 slices of turkey bacon. And then this is the part where I mix it up. I either have a slice of toast with some peanut butter on it, or I will turn those eggs and turkey bacon and chop it up, and I will make breakfast tacos. And then I'll put salsa over whatever is needed, a little bit of cheese, and that is what I do every morning, just because I've been trying my best to just eat healthier this year. So that's kind of been my go-to, and I've just read in a lot of different places, the more you try to mix things up, the more you get tempted by kind of staying away from the diet. So, and I just love eggs. So I just eat that every single morning, get you your 40 to 50 grams of protein in the morning. And, that I can feel good that I at least I eat healthy in the morning so that I don't feel as bad when I eat something really bad for me in the evening. Yeah.